Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 1, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by LaughingWolf78 on Wattpad. Now let's start. It was an unbearable heat, more intense than the summer sun, and it felt as if his skin might blister at any moment. Sweat streamed into his eyes, blurring his vision as his quirk surged with energy, crackling explosions erupting from his arms, not just his hands. Each step he took was a struggle, pain radiating through his broken bones, blood trickling from his nose and clouding his sight. He felt weak, though he refused to acknowledge it. The air was thick with smoke and fire, creating a hellish atmosphere filled with the screams of civilians, heroes, and villains alike. The cacophony was deafening, amplified by the ringing in his ears from his own powerful explosions. He could hear Shigaraki's taunts, the lunatic's voice cutting through the chaos. Amidst the madness, one name ignited a fierce anger within him, Deku. The thought of his friend being in danger fueled his determination. His chest heaved with a mix of rage and pain as he vowed to stop Shigaraki before Izuku arrived. He couldn't let this villain harm the green-eyed hero. He cursed and shouted, his voice hoarse from exertion, vowing to send the villain to hell. His gear felt impossibly heavy, even though much of it was tattered and broken. The green gauntlets weighed him down as he struggled to stand, dragging himself from his knees where he had been gasping for breath. He was acutely aware of the cracking of bones beneath his skin, a reminder of the toll the relentless battle had taken on him and those around him. Hours of fighting in this villain war had left him isolated, unsure of his friend's whereabouts. The absence of Izuku weighed heavily on him, filling him with dread. He raised his gauntlets, positioning his battered arm for an attack, his focus narrowing to the chaos around him. Amidst the turmoil, he could faintly hear Aizawa's voice, calling out his name in a panicked tone, urging Genius to protect him. But it felt too late for protection as he unleashed his explosion, the sound echoing with a hint of madness. Time seemed to slow as he faced Shigaraki, the villain's twisted smile and laugh piercing through the chaos. He didn't realize he had been struck until he found himself launched away from where he had stood. As he lay on the ground, his crimson eyes gazed up at the smoky sky, his vision clouded and painful. He felt a chilling numbness spread through him, a stark contrast to the heat he had felt moments before. Memories flashed before him like a film reel, playing on a playground with Izuku, the development of his quirk, moments of bullying and regret, the slow rebuilding of their friendship, and finally, a gentle kiss after graduation. A fresh start that now felt so fragile. Around him, he could hear Aizawa and Genius, their voices breaking through the fog of pain. He caught fragments of their words, urging him to hold on, to wait for the one who would come to save him. He wanted to fight against the chains of despair tightening around him, to see those green eyes again and embrace the love they had only just begun to explore. As he raised a trembling hand toward a patch of bluish-green sky, he thought of Izuku, wishing to remain his hero. Just then, he felt a surge of energy, a familiar presence that ignited hope within him. He heard Izuku's voice, filled with raw emotion, and then everything faded into darkness. Suddenly he awoke in his dark bedroom, breathless and drenched in sweat. It was another nightmare, the same one that had haunted him for 2 years since the war with the League of Villains. He climbed out of bed, letting the covers fall away as he made his way to the bathroom for a drink to soothe his throat, raw from his screams. Flicking on the light, he glanced at his reflection in the mirror while filling a glass. It was still a challenge to face himself, but he had made progress over the past year. His crimson eyes examined the deep scars on the left side of his face, a reminder of battles fought. His left eye was partially clouded, and although he could see, his vision was far from perfect. There were deep, scar-like marks on his chest and back, but they didn't trouble him as much as the one over his heart. As he took a drink from his glass of water, he let a strong finger trace the jagged scar, a reminder of the time when Edgeshot and Best Jeanist had stitched him back together, mending the damage done. He tilted the glass, emptying its contents before refilling it, repeating the action as he made his way back to his room. The large blonde fell back onto his bed with a thud and a heavy sigh, staring up at the ceiling. It was early, with daylight just beginning to break, dim light filtering through the dark curtains. Fatigue weighed on Katsuki. He hadn't slept through the night in 2 years, always waking to the nightmares that haunted him. If it wasn't the nightmares, it was the green eyes that shattered his mended heart over and over again. As Katsuki stepped off the plane back in his hometown, he was filled with a mixture of emotions. He pulled the hood of his black hoodie over his perfectly sculpted spikes, black shades covering his eyes, and earbuds in place as he moved with his bag slung over his shoulder to pick up his rental car. Only All Might and Aizawa knew he was home. The blonde hero had requested that it remain a secret until he was ready to share it with the rest. After signing the rental agreement and getting into the sleek black car, he let out a sigh as he closed the door and pulled his hood down. A flood of nerves, apprehension, and excitement churned in his stomach. He was uncertain how everyone would react to his return after he had cut himself off to heal, but soon he would find out. Not far from the airport, a green-eyed hero stood on the rooftop of the hero agency after his patrol, gazing over the setting sun. He leaned against the edge, taking a deep breath of late summer air, letting his mind drift. He often came here, usually after or before a shift. It was quiet, and from this vantage point, he could see the entire city. It was a place he preferred to be alone, known to only a few. Tonight, the sunset painted the sky in vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows, evoking a sense of nostalgia that filled him with longing for the past and for a person who occupied every corner of his thoughts. Izuku's gaze fixated on the fiery streaks coloring the sky, and an ache filled his chest as he pictured eyes of the same hue. Those eyes would forever haunt him, captivating a heart that hadn't felt whole in 2 years. He missed Katsuki every single day he was gone. He had hoped that the pain of the blonde leaving would eventually fade, but it hadn't. The heartache felt just as intense today as it had 2 years ago, sometimes even more so. He had desperately tried to reach out to Katsuki, wanting him to come home or at least share where he was, but the blonde had remained silent, keeping his distance. Izuku was heartbroken. Katsuki had pushed him away, refusing to allow him to help heal the wounds left by the trauma of war. As tears brimmed in his deep green eyes, he recalled how upset Katsuki had been about the scars on his face. Izuku had tried to reassure him that looks didn't matter, that he was still just as good-looking as ever, and that his feelings ran deeper than appearances. But the blonde struggled to believe those words, refusing to let Izuku see him up close or touch him. Tears began to fall down his fair skin as he squeezed his eyes shut. If only that stubborn blonde had realized how much Izuku cared and how badly he wanted to help heal both the physical and mental wounds. If only he had believed that nothing would change Izuku's feelings, especially not the scars. He opened his eyes slowly when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. There was no need to turn around. He knew it could only be a few people who were aware of this spot. When he heard the familiar monotone voice of his best friend, he knew he was right. Shoto stepped up to his side, leaning against the ledge. He could see the slight shrug of Izuku's shoulders in his green hero suit, the summer breeze tousling his green locks. Izuku spoke softly, revealing the hurt he still carried. He shared how he thought about Katsuki every day, how he didn't know if he would ever truly be all right. He expressed his disbelief over the blonde's absence and how he had hoped and prayed for his return. It was a cruel reality to face when he realized how wrong he had been. Shoto sighed, offering comfort. He reminded Izuku that none of them could know for certain that Katsuki wouldn't return. He acknowledged the pain Izuku had endured and how Katsuki's pride had been deeply affected by the events of the past. Shoto explained that Katsuki had always struggled with feeling inadequate, especially regarding Izuku. He had been unable to see that Izuku truly cared and wanted to be there for him. The burden of his emotions after the war had been overwhelming, and while it wasn't right for him to leave, the reasons behind it were more complex than anyone could fully understand. Everyone faced many challenges after the war, each in their own way. Shoto tried to explain to Izuku that Bakugo had made choices he thought were best for himself, even if those choices were painful. Izuku nodded, finally meeting his friend's bicolored eyes filled with concern, and managed a smile through his tears. Deep down, he understood everything 𝐀𝐮𝐱𝐻 was saying. He had hoped to be enough of a reason for Bakugo to stay. 𝐀𝐮𝐻 sighed, feeling a pang of sympathy for his friend. He acknowledged that Izuku's relationship with Bakugo was new, especially at the level of being a couple. It seemed Bakugo may have felt overwhelmed, unable to fix everything, including himself. Izuku took a deep breath, recognizing the truth in 𝐀𝐮𝐻's words. However, knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. He admitted to 𝐀𝐮𝐻 that he shouldn't still be so consumed by his feelings, especially since he had started dating someone else and was trying to move on. 𝐀𝐮𝐻 observed his friend carefully, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hero suit. He questioned whether Izuku had truly moved on. The inquiry caused Izuku to feel the sting of tears again. He insisted he was trying, but doubt lingered in his heart. 𝐀𝐮𝐻 nodded, a hint of a smile appearing as he began to walk away. He mentioned he was going downstairs to change and suggested Izuku should head home too, as it had been a long day. Izuku watched his friend leave, grappling with the uncertainty of whether he had genuinely moved on. Meanwhile, in a small, windowless office at the hero agency, Katsuki entered unnoticed through a back door. Suddenly, the door swung open, and he was met with All Might's tearful blue eyes. All Might expressed his joy at seeing Katsuki and pulled him into a hug before he could protest. Katsuki found himself embracing the man who had always been his hero, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Katsuki returned the hug, thanking All Might and expressing how good it felt to be back. As All Might released him, Aizawa stepped forward, giving Katsuki a warm pat on the shoulder, filled with pride. Katsuki smirked and nodded at Aizawa, recalling how the man had both intimidated and taught him during their time at UA. Once everyone was seated, All Might asked how Katsuki had been since their last conversation and whether he felt ready to return to hero work. Katsuki confidently stated that he was ready, acknowledging the work he had to do to regain his former status as a hero. He assured them he had kept up with his training and was prepared for the challenges ahead. All Might beamed with pride, confident that Katsuki would quickly catch up. Aizawa agreed, noting that Katsuki appeared to be in peak condition. He then inquired about Katsuki's mental state. Katsuki admitted he was feeling better than before, dealing with his struggles one day at a time. He believed returning to work would help him complete the process of rebuilding himself. As they discussed the details of his return, Katsuki decided to start on Monday, allowing himself a few days to settle in. Aizawa smiled at his straightforwardness, and All Might expressed happiness at having him back, encouraging him to reach out if he needed anything. As they prepared to leave, All Might placed a hand on Katsuki's shoulder, asking if he had spoken to Izuku since returning. The mention of Izuku made Katsuki pause, and he admitted he hadn't yet informed anyone of his return, not even his parents. All Might reminded him that Izuku was different from everyone else, prompting Katsuki to reflect on his feelings for his friend. He never has been. The blue-eyed hero smiled, feeling a twinge of pain knowing the history between them. He believed that the other would be surprised by the sudden return, emotions bubbling to the surface. The hero felt it was important for him to express what he needed to, but he also knew that the other had never stopped caring over the past 2 years. A reminder might be necessary as it worked both ways, and he would bet his entire career as a hero on that. Katsuki met that caring blue gaze, feeling a surge of emotions that he wanted to express but couldn't. He nodded in response. He would see the other on Monday. With that, he left the room, pulling his hood back up as he walked down the empty hallway. Suddenly, something on the wall caught his eye. It was a mural titled, "The Hands of Our Heroes," featuring handprints of each hero dipped in paint. Katsuki immediately recognized Izuku's handprint. He had held it tightly a few times. A slight smile crossed his sharp features as he took his hand out of his hoodie pocket, heated up his quirk, and pressed his hand over Izuku's, creating a mark of his own while ensuring Izuku's was still visible beneath it. With a smirk, he pulled his hood back up and exited the building. A few minutes later, Izuku walked down that same hallway after changing, his bag slung over his shoulder as he chatted with 𝐀𝐻𝐻. Suddenly, a familiar scent stopped him in his tracks, his heart racing. He recognized it instantly. It was burnt caramel, sweet and heated, the scent of nitroglycerin, Katsuki's quirk. Shoto noticed his friend's sudden stillness and inquired about it. Izuku's green eyes darted around the area as he searched, feeling a wave of urgency. He insisted that the smell was unmistakable, just like Katsuki's quirk. Shoto, however, suggested that it could be something or someone else, reminding Izuku that Bakugo wasn't the only one with an explosion quirk. Izuku felt a pang of disappointment but acknowledged the possibility. As they headed out the doors, his teary emerald eyes missed the larger handprint now combined with his own. As soon as Katsuki arrived at his childhood home, he felt a mix of anxiety and relief. He stepped out of the sleek black car he had rented, taking a moment to lean against the door and gather his thoughts. This place would always be home, even amidst chaos. His deep crimson eyes glanced down the street at another familiar house that had once felt just as much like home. He felt a familiar ache thinking of Izuku's house, where he had spent many childhood days and nights. Their mothers had remained close friends, and 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 Midoriya had always treated him like family, loving him despite his rough edges, just as she had raised her son to feel about him. Katsuki sighed heavily, knowing he must have hurt her deeply when he left. He could only imagine the pain she felt watching Izuku suffer over him. Taking a deep breath, he acknowledged that this was yet another relationship he needed to mend. Just as he stepped off the sidewalk toward the house, the front door opened, and two women emerged, chatting and laughing, unaware of his presence. Katsuki watched with a racing heart, feeling fortunate that they were both there. 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 was the first to notice, her green eyes widening in shock as her words caught in her throat, tears welling up almost instantly. Oh my goodness! Mitsuki followed her gaze, her eyes widening as she took shaky steps forward, realizing her son stood there in a black hoodie, hands in his pockets, wearing a gentle smirk. Katsuki, she whispered, the name a question she already knew the answer to. He greeted her, apologizing for not calling, but before he could say more, she rushed to him, wrapping her arms around her tall, broad son and holding him tightly. You're home. Oh my goodness, you're home. Tears welled in his own eyes as he embraced his crying mother. Yeah, I'm home, he replied softly, burying his face in her blonde hair, which matched his own. When she finally looked up at him, her smile broke through her tears as she reached up to touch his strong jawline. A wave of relief washed over her, knowing her boy was finally back. It's about time. I missed you, brat. We all did. You look so good. Welcome home, kid. He returned her smile with an emotional nod, feeling grateful for her words. Thanks. He missed her too, or something like that, and he smirked, true to his nature, making her laugh as she playfully smacked his chest before hugging him again. She decided to let it slide because she had missed his cocky demeanor so much. He laughed lightly, feeling his anxiety begin to fade away in the warmth of their familiar banter as mother and son. She looked up at him again, her expression brightening. His father would be so happy to see him. He was away for a day or so, but she would call him. He nodded, agreeing that it was a good idea and promised to call his father later. She smiled at him, then noticed his gaze shift to the woman still standing on the porch, wiping her eyes while giving them space to catch up. She patted his arm and nodded toward her friend, encouraging him to go say hi since she had missed him just as much. Taking a deep breath, he moved to the porch, looking down at the much shorter woman. His crimson eyes softened at the sight of her teary green ones. He greeted her, and she sniffled, tears streaming down her face as she leaned forward to embrace him. It was so good to see him again. He smiled, returning the embrace, expressing that it was good to see her too. She looked up at him, a smile on her face, even as more tears fell. She mentioned that she would leave them to catch up, not wanting to intrude, but insisted he come see her once he was settled. He nodded, agreeing, and offered to walk her home quickly. She smiled and took hold of his arm, grateful for the gesture. He glanced back at his mother, who was grinning, happy that her son had finally returned. He assured her he would be right back. As they began to walk, he felt the need to apologize. He spoke up, fearing he might choke on the words if he didn't. She stopped and looked up at him, noticing the regret in his eyes. She asked what he was sorry for, and he cleared his throat, trying to suppress the lump forming there. He expressed his remorse for leaving and for hurting everyone, especially her and Deku. The name came out with a crack in his tone that he desperately tried to hide. She felt a rush of empathy as she gently touched his scarred cheek. She urged him to look at her and continued, explaining that he hadn't been in a good place when he left. They understood why he needed space to heal, and although it was painful to let him go alone, they knew it was necessary. He had done what he felt he had to, and from the looks of him, his time away had been spent getting better. No one could be upset with him for that. His gaze fell to the sidewalk as he scoffed, a slight smirk masking the pain behind it. He believed Deku would disagree, knowing how much he had hurt him and how that pain had affected her. He wouldn't blame her if she never wanted to see him again. Kirishima could hardly believe his eyes as he stared at his best friend, whom he hadn't seen in 2 years. Emotions swept over him as he stepped forward, wiping his eyes, while the other 2 heroes tried to process the moment. He exclaimed how unbelievable it was to see him and asked how he had been. The blonde nodded with a smirk, feeling a rush of emotion at the sight and sound of his old high school crew. He assured them he was all right, better than he had been, and pretty much back to his old arrogant self. Kirishima chuckled through teary eyes, expressing how much that meant to him. Another voice broke in as the other heroes finally let the moment sink in. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 exclaimed how amazing it was to see him back in town and complimented his appearance. The blonde smiled slightly and reached out to fist bump one of his oldest friends, teasing that 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 was just as ugly as ever, which made them laugh through their tears. Denki stepped up, sniffling as he approached the blonde. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, unsure of what was coming. Denki declared that he was going to hug him because he missed him, closing the distance before Katsuki could decline. The blonde tensed at first, not entirely comfortable with such affection from his friends, but he found himself letting it happen, rolling his eyes with a smile as he patted Denki on the back. He smirked, teasing Denki about being as annoying as always. Denki held on tighter, expressing that he missed him too and wasn't planning on letting go. Katsuki began to heat up his quirk, prompting Denki to jump back, exclaiming he would let go. The blonde smirked, satisfied with the reaction. They all chuckled, the feeling of old times flowing easily around them. Kirishima cleared his throat, declaring he was going in for a hug too, followed by 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽. They closed the distance and embraced the blonde they hadn't seen in 2 years. Katsuki gave them a light hug, grinning and shaking his head at their sentimentality. He teased them about getting soft, insisting they stop with the emotional moments. They pulled away, laughing, and 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 expressed how awesome it was to see him. Kirishima asked how long he would be in town. The blonde shrugged, putting his hands in his pockets and giving a hint of a smile as he replied that he was back for good. Katsuki announced that he was moving back, and his friend's eyes lit up with excitement. They almost lunged toward him, but he stepped back, raising his hands and quickly activating his quirk. They laughed, surrendering playfully, just before being hit by a powerful quirk they had seen in action before. Denki suggested they buy him a drink and catch up outside, to which Katsuki shrugged with a smirk, agreeing that he had nothing better to do. As they chatted away, it felt nice for Katsuki. The familiar camaraderie reminded him of the time he had spent with this group, a time he had missed more than he cared to admit. After paying for drinks and snacks, they took a short walk to a park picnic table where they all sat down. Katsuki took a sip of his favorite caramel iced coffee, clearing his throat as he focused on the can in his hand. He felt the need to address something important. He began, acknowledging that he wasn't great at expressing himself but needed to get something off his chest. He apologized for cutting them off when he left to sort out his issues, recognizing that it had been a disappointing experience for them after all the years they had spent as friends. He explained that he hadn't felt mentally or emotionally stable enough to handle it at the time, and while he knew he had hurt their feelings, he needed space. Now that he was back to being himself, he wanted them to know he appreciated their encouragement, even if he hadn't responded. Silence fell over the group, making Katsuki nervous until he looked up to see tears in their eyes and light chuckles escaping their lips. Kirishima asked if they had heard him, and 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 confirmed that he had. Denki wondered if anyone had recorded it, and Kirishima added that they definitely should have. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 then asked if they understood what Katsuki was saying, and Denki grinned, realizing that he had truly missed them. Kirishima agreed with a bright smile. Katsuki looked between his friends, feeling a mix of confusion and amusement. He rolled his eyes and stood up, pretending to be annoyed as they teased him. He jokingly declared he was going home, prompting laughter from his friends. Kirishima called after him, insisting that he was just being dramatic. Katsuki turned back, clicking his tongue in mock irritation, but they all laughed, recognizing the familiar banter. Kirishima apologized, explaining that they didn't want him to feel bad about his absence. He acknowledged that it had been tough and that they had missed him, but they understood his need for space. 𝐬𝐮𝐬 expressed how happy they were to see him doing better and back home, while Denki reassured him that everything was forgiven, even if there was nothing to forgive. Katsuki couldn't help but smile, relieved by their warm reception. He had worried about how they would react, but now he realized he had no reason to be concerned. These were his true friends. He smirked and thanked them, feeling a sense of belonging. Kirishima asked if he had a place lined up since he was moving back. Katsuki shook his head, taking another sip of his coffee. He planned to stay with his parents until he found something suitable, which he hoped wouldn't take long. 𝐬𝐮𝐬 inquired about his return to hero work, and Katsuki grinned, suggesting he might be back as soon as Monday. The three heroes' eyes widened in disbelief, halting all movement as Katsuki chuckled at their reactions. 𝐬𝐮𝐬 exclaimed in excitement, asking if he was serious, while Kirishima jumped to his feet, unable to contain his enthusiasm. Denki's eyes were wide with a big smile as he processed the news. Katsuki laughed at their sheer joy, confirming that he was indeed serious. He declared that he was back to his old self, ready to take on challenges once again. The three heroes cheered loudly, thrilled at the prospect of his return. Kirishima exclaimed how amazing it was, while 𝐬𝐮𝐬 echoed the sentiment. Katsuki chuckled, reminding them that the king was making his comeback and they better be ready. Denki cheered that villains wouldn't stand a chance, and Katsuki grinned widely, feeling a sense of camaraderie wash over him. They all laughed together, just like the old days at UA and the times after graduation before everything changed. It felt easy and light just as it had always been. Hours passed before they realized how late it had gotten. It's after midnight when 𝐬𝐮𝐬 and Denki bid their friends goodnight, with the blonde promising to hang out with them again over the weekend before the two part ways, heading back to their apartments. Kirishima stays behind and walks with the blonde since Katsuki's route home aligns with theirs. As they stroll down the city sidewalk, Kirishima fills the blonde in on various happenings since his absence, and Katsuki shares his own updates. However, a lingering ache resides in Katsuki's chest. Despite the joy of reuniting, there is one person with freckles and haunting green eyes that he has yet to see. As if sensing his thoughts, Kirishima asks if he has seen Izuku yet. The blonde turns to his friend, raising an eyebrow, as Izuku had been heavy on his mind. He admits he hasn't seen him yet. Kirishima meets his gaze with a gentle smile and inquires if he wants to. Katsuki scoffs slightly, his crimson eyes shifting down to his white sneakers on the sidewalk. He acknowledges that he wants to see Izuku but doubts that Izuku would want to see him. Kirishima's rose-red eyes soften as he reassures him that Izuku has become one of his closest friends and would definitely want to see him. Katsuki shrugs, still unable to meet his friend's eyes, expressing his uncertainty. He reflects on how he hurt Izuku when he walked away, feeling a wave of nausea at the thought. Kirishima sighs, glancing down the sidewalk. He acknowledges that Izuku was indeed hurting but reminds Katsuki that Izuku understood he was suffering too, which contributed to his pain, knowing he couldn't be there for him. Katsuki kicks at a pebble on the sidewalk, still downcast, admitting he messed up with Izuku. Kirishima agrees but insists that Izuku will want to see him, as he has always cared about Katsuki's well-being. A question forms in Katsuki's mind about whether something is going on with Izuku, noting that everyone has been vague when he brings him up. Kirishima feels a knot in his stomach, unsure of how to respond. He knows that revealing the truth, that Izuku is dating someone, could lead to chaos. However, he also knows that Izuku still holds strong feelings for Katsuki. Taking a deep breath, he assures Katsuki that Izuku is fine but suggests they should talk. Katsuki halts in his tracks, feeling a pit in his stomach. He demands to know what 𝐻𝐻𝐿 means. The redhead offers the best smile he can muster, explaining that Katsuki has been away for 2 years without a word, and there are things that need to be addressed. He urges Katsuki to just talk to Izuku. Katsuki takes a shaky breath, feeling a mix of heat and unease. He senses that despite what All Might, his mother, and now 𝐻𝐻𝐿 have said, there is something they are not revealing. Days later, on Sunday, Katsuki returns to the agency headquarters to sign paperwork requested by Aizawa before starting work the following day. He has kept a low profile, spending time with his parents and searching for apartments online. Things have been going better than he expected. When he decided to return after 2 years, he worried about how his friends would react to his sudden reappearance. To his relief, they welcomed him back with open arms, as if no time had passed. His parents were equally understanding, though his mother did scold him for worrying her, always following it up with a hug that made him chuckle. He also visited 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, doing small repairs around her house. The sound of her laughter reminded him of Izuku, making his heart ache for 2 reasons. He missed it, and it brought back memories of Izuku's own laughter. Katsuki had hoped to see Izuku during these visits, but 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 mentioned that Izuku had been working excessively, which troubled him. Among everyone he has reconnected with, the one he is most anxious to see again is Izuku. As he walks through the lower part of the agency toward Aizawa's office, he encounters a familiar figure with bicolored hair and eyes stepping out of another office, focused on a folder for a villain case. The sight of Todoroki makes Katsuki smirk, recalling how he once disliked him for being close to Izuku. However, after seeing the support Todoroki provided during their relationship, he accepted that Todoroki was simply Izuku's best friend. Katsuki teases Todoroki, remarking that he still looks ugly. It was nice to see that some things never changed. Shoto snapped his head up quickly, his bicolored eyes widening as he saw the familiar smirking blonde standing in the hallway with his arms crossed. He stumbled out in surprise, taking steps toward the blonde hero. Katsuki rolled his eyes, the smirk still present on his face, and remarked that it was obvious who he was. Shoto felt as if he were seeing a ghost after so long without Katsuki. He took another step closer, his eyes still wide, but a rare smile broke through his normally emotionless expression. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, unsure of what was happening since Shoto hadn't said anything other than his name. For a moment, he wondered if Shoto was going to take a swing at him for leaving and hurting Izuku, but instead, Shoto did something completely unexpected. He reached out and hugged Katsuki tightly. The blonde hero froze, eyebrows raised in surprise. When Shoto pulled away, he wore a full smile, which made Katsuki furrow his brow in confusion. He exclaimed in disbelief, questioning if Shoto had just hugged him and was smiling. It was a strange sight that made him uneasy. This only made Shoto smile more and even laugh slightly, confirming that this was indeed Katsuki Bakugo in all his rough-around-the-edges personality. With that smile still present, Shoto admitted that he had hugged Katsuki, stating it seemed like the right thing to do, however awkward it was for both of them. Katsuki smirked, relieved to see Shoto's awkward side. He joked that he thought Shoto had been hit with a quirk that made him forget how to be himself. Shoto chuckled and shook his head, expressing how good it was to see Katsuki again and asking if he was visiting. Katsuki leaned back against the hallway wall, revealing that he was moving back and would start hero work again on Monday. Shoto's eyes widened again, and he almost hugged Katsuki once more until the blonde raised his palms, heat radiating from them. He warned Shoto not to hug him again, expressing his frustration at everyone doing that. Shoto shrugged, suggesting that it was because Katsuki was missed, maybe even more than he realized. He welcomed Katsuki home, and the blonde nodded, feeling a swell of emotion at the warm welcome he had received from everyone. Clearing his throat to push down the unexpected wave of emotion, Katsuki began to ask Shoto if he had seen Izuku. Just then, 𝐻𝐻𝐿 entered the hallway after finishing his patrol, greeting both of them with enthusiasm. He pointed out that they should catch up in another office as they were in the way. Katsuki studied his friend, confused by his words since there was no one else in the hallway. He noticed a hint of panic in 𝐻𝐻𝐿's eyes. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 met Shoto's gaze and gave a slight nod toward the outside window. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 looked out to see Izuku walking up the sidewalk, but it wasn't just him that caught their attention. Katsuki's sharp crimson eyes followed the quick glances of the other two heroes until he finally spotted a familiar green hero suit. He went completely still, his heart nearly stopping as he watched Izuku pull off his hero mask and ruffle his green hair. Katsuki felt a mix of emotions seeing Izuku for the first time up close in 2 long years. His heart raced with both an ache and happiness, unsure of how Izuku would react to his return. As he turned to leave, Kirishima and Shoto grabbed his arm, trying to warn him to wait. Katsuki pulled his arm back, frustrated and demanding to know why he should wait when Izuku was right there. Kirishima sighed, glancing between Shoto and Katsuki, explaining that he wanted Katsuki to talk to Izuku, just not at that moment. Shoto supported this, suggesting they wait until later when he and Izuku were supposed to hang out. Kirishima agreed that it was a perfect idea, but Katsuki felt a pit in his stomach. He sensed that something was off, and he was determined to find out what everyone was tiptoeing around. As he turned to rush down the hallway and out the doors to the sidewalk, something caught his eye. A stranger stood too close to Izuku, laughing and talking with him, causing a wave of nausea to wash over Katsuki. He stared, unblinking, feeling the blood rush through his ears and his heart pounding. Something was very wrong, and he knew that whatever this was, it was exactly what everyone had been keeping from him. Katsuki watched with narrowed crimson eyes as the male in a black and red hero suit leaned in closer to Izuku, placing a hand on his upper arm with a smile. This was bad enough, but what Katsuki Bakugo saw next set off a storm of emotions within him. Just a few feet away, someone leaned in and kissed the only guy Katsuki had ever loved, causing his crimson eyes to widen in disbelief. A yell erupted from him, so loud it felt like it could shatter glass. There was no way this was happening. Before he could process it, Katsuki's hands ignited with flames. The heat radiated off him in waves, smoke curling around his body. He felt faint, white spots dancing in his vision as incoherent words spilled from his lips, tears streaming down his face without him even realizing it. He pushed through the other heroes, eyes blazing with fury, palms ready to unleash a barrage of explosions at the audacious person who dared to be near what was his. His mind raced, thoughts sharp and lethal as he moved with such speed that it caused a dizzying rush. His heart ached, pounding against his ribcage with a force that felt unbearable. Before he could reach the door, Kirishima activated his quirk, his body turning to stone as he stepped in front of his friend. He pleaded with Katsuki to stop, warning him that he would regret any rash actions. Katsuki's eyes burned with rage. He was adamant that he wouldn't regret it and demanded Kirishima to move aside, intent on confronting the person who had crossed a line. Shoto was doing his best to restrain Katsuki, wrapping his arms around him and activating his own fire quirk to shield himself from the heat radiating off the explosive hero. He urged Katsuki to calm down, but Katsuki was too consumed by anger to listen. He raged about the person outside, expressing his disbelief that someone could touch what belonged to him. His voice trembled with emotion as he struggled against Shoto's hold. But then Kirishima said something that struck Katsuki like a blow. He reminded Katsuki that the person he was so furious about was no longer his. He had been the one to end things and had told the other to find someone else. Kirishima's words echoed painfully in the hallway, and Katsuki froze, eyes wide with hurt. Kirishima lowered his head, regret evident on his face. He wished he could have prepared Katsuki for this moment, but it was too late now. Katsuki narrowed his eyes, pulling away from Shoto's grip, pointing an accusing finger at Kirishima. He demanded to know why he hadn't been informed earlier, expressing his frustration that his best friend hadn't told him sooner. Kirishima scoffed, flashing across his features as he defended himself. He explained that they had tried to reach out to Katsuki, but he had shut them out completely. Katsuki lunged forward, fists clenched, but Shoto stopped him before he could act on his anger. The truth hit Katsuki hard, forcing him to take a deep breath. He knew Kirishima was right. Shoto sighed, urging Katsuki to calm down and talk things through. But Katsuki was done talking. He turned and headed for an office at the end of the hall, gripping the door handle so tightly that it began to smoke from the heat of his palm. He flung the door open, slamming it against the wall as he stormed into Aizawa's office. The pro hero looked up from his desk, his tired eyes not surprised by Katsuki's arrival. He had anticipated this moment. Katsuki slammed his fist down on the desk, the heat from his hand leaving a mark on the wood. He confronted Aizawa, demanding to know why he hadn't been informed about Midoriya's relationship status before returning. Aizawa remained calm, explaining that he didn't think Midoriya's personal life was relevant to the job he was offering. Katsuki felt like his skin was on fire as he paced the room, smoke still rising from him. He insisted that Aizawa knew exactly what he meant, that he understood the significance of Midoriya to him. Aizawa asked if Katsuki's feelings had changed now that he knew the truth. Katsuki hesitated, unsure of what he felt at that moment. Deep down, he knew that nothing could change how he felt about Midoriya. He turned his head away, refusing to answer. Aizawa sighed, acknowledging that Katsuki's feelings remained unchanged and that he likely would have returned sooner if he had known. Katsuki clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath as he decided he needed to leave before he did something he would regret. He pushed past Shoto and Kirishima, who watched him with concern as he stormed out through a side door. Moments later, Izuku entered the hallway, looking worn and tired. He noticed the two heroes and gave a light laugh, questioning why they looked so troubled. But then a familiar scent hit his nose, reminiscent of the last time Katsuki had been furious. Izuku's eyes widened as he inhaled deeply, recognizing the intensity of the emotion in the air. Kirishima and Shoto exchanged glances, watching as Izuku moved down the hallway, searching for something. Izuku paused, his emerald eyes landing on a mural of hero hands, feeling a sense of urgency wash over him. He sees it, the large print branded into his skin, and now he knows he's not imagining things. Tears fall immediately as his quirk activates, and he takes off down the hall and out the doors, looking, searching, praying. With a wild hammering heart and eyes wide with tears, he frantically scans the sidewalk until he spots him. He sees the broad back of a hero he loved, a hero he'd recognize anywhere, a hero he always chased, and in this split second he's chasing him again. His legs carry him quickly, his heart pounding and his green quirk flaring. Words are stuck in his throat as he sobs before he even reaches his target, but one broken word escapes, hitting Katsuki like a bullet and causing him to stop and turn around immediately. Kacchan. Crimson eyes watch with a sharply beating heart as Izuku races down the sidewalk toward him. One part of Katsuki is absolutely ecstatic to see the greenette, while another part feels almost terrified. They haven't seen each other face to face since that heartbreaking day when Katsuki left, and now the pain from that moment still thumps in his chest. Katsuki is not used to fear, but at this moment, it's difficult to deny that feeling rising within him. He stays planted on the sidewalk, waiting for whatever is to come. This moment holds so much weight that it feels like it's crushing him where he stands. As his mind races in a million different directions, Izuku stands in front of him before he can fully process it. For the first time in 2 long, painful years, deep crimson eyes meet shocked emerald green ones filled with tears. Izuku stops short, breathing from his sprint to the blonde he still can't believe is here. He places a hand over his mouth in shock, standing in disbelief with tear-filled eyes. He wants to say so much, but it's all tangled in a web of emotions racing through his mind and heart. Katsuki seems lost for words too, letting it sink in for Izuku that this is real, that he is real. Finally, Izuku speaks, stumbling through his tears. He knew it was him, despite what others said. It's really him. Katsuki feels his heart ache, his mouth going dry as he tries to find the words. He starts to greet Izuku, but the nickname he used to call him dies on his tongue as the greenette slams into him, hugging him tightly while sobs break out against his shoulder. Katsuki freezes, unsure how to react, but of all the hugs he's received since his return, this one is the only one he's ached for over the past 2 years. This one matters. The sound of Izuku's broken sobs cuts through him like nothing else, and he slowly wraps his arms around the crying male. The feeling of Izuku squeezing back sends a rush through his veins, a strange mix of pleasure and heartache. Izuku is equally overwhelmed as he sobs against the blonde hero he wasn't sure he'd ever see again. He inhales the familiar scent of nitroglycerin, which only makes him break down further as he feels Katsuki's powerful arms engulf him. He can feel trembling, unsure if it's coming from him or Katsuki, but he suspects it might be both. He feels unsteady, a wash of emotions flooding him all at once. He wants to scream until his lungs hurt, wants to unleash his quirk and punch Katsuki, wants to leave him standing there without another word. But a bigger part of him wants to stay clinging to him, letting days, nights, even weeks go by, terrified of losing this feeling again. Katsuki lets him cry in the embrace, allowing him to sob his heart out, even if it tortures his own soul to hear it. Words that would surprise anyone suddenly roll off his tongue. He tells Izuku to calm down, that it's all right and not to cry. There were many years when Katsuki made Izuku cry, especially during middle school, but now the sound makes him hurt in ways a villain attack never could. Izuku finally pulls away, still close to the blonde, looking into crimson eyes that glisten with unshed tears. He forces himself to calm down, biting his lip to suppress another sob that threatens to escape. A smile begins to form on his soft features. He can't believe Katsuki is here. He reaches for the blonde's cheek, the one scarred from a fight that nearly took his life, but as he goes to touch it, Katsuki pulls his head away and shakes his head. The small action causes a flash of pain in Izuku's eyes as he remembers that before Katsuki left, he wouldn't let Izuku touch him at all. Katsuki clears his throat and takes a step back, trying to force a smile through his aching heart. He tells Izuku to believe it because he is definitely here. There's so much to say, so much that needs to be said, but they both seem a little lost as they awkwardly take each other in. Izuku finally speaks again, complimenting Katsuki on how good he looks. Katsuki nods with a slight smile but locks his crimson eyes onto Izuku's exhausted gaze. He points out that Izuku looks tired. Izuku laughs at this, feeling relieved to hear Katsuki being himself again. He thanks him for the compliment, and Katsuki insists that he never knew when to slow down and rest. Yes, when the last time Izuku slept was. Izuku shifts, avoiding Katsuki's questioning gaze, and shrugs. He suggests that there are more important things to discuss, like how long Katsuki will be in town. Katsuki studies him, noticing how he brushes off the sleep question, and replies that he is back for good. Katsuki announced that he was moving back, and Izuku's emerald eyes widened with tears, a smile forming that mixed both pain and joy. He could hardly believe it and asked if it was true. Katsuki confirmed it, nodding and putting his hands in his pockets, revealing that he would start hero work on Monday. Izuku's excitement was palpable as he inquired about where Katsuki would be working. Katsuki's smile grew at Izuku's enthusiasm as he explained he would be working right there again, having signed back on with Aizawa and All Might. Izuku's heart raced with joy, but then a thought struck him, prompting him to ask how long Katsuki had been home. Katsuki noticed the hint of pain in Izuku's eyes, a pain he hadn't recognized before, and replied that he had only been home for a few days. Just then he noticed someone approaching, someone who had kissed Izuku not long ago. Mitsuki sat at her kitchen table, sipping her tea while listening to her son making noise in his old bedroom upstairs. The familiar sound reminded her of his childhood, especially when he was upset. She could tell from the moment he walked through the door that he had seen or heard about Izuku, especially when he mumbled about not being hungry and stormed upstairs to work out, slamming the door with a loud bang. After 2 hours of noise, she sighed and picked up her phone to call her best friend. Inko answered on the second ring, excitedly mentioning curtains she had found. However, her cheerful tone shifted when Mitsuki interrupted with 2 simple words. He knows. Inko felt a knot form in her stomach, sensing that something had gone wrong. Mitsuki explained that Katsuki had been in his room for hours, hitting his punching bag. Inko hadn't heard from Izuku yet, but she suspected he was feeling a whirlwind of emotions after seeing Katsuki. Mitsuki joked about Katsuki's temper, noting that at least no BLD had been shed and the police hadn't shown up. Inko couldn't help but laugh, but she also felt a pang of concern for Katsuki's heartache. Mitsuki decided it was time for some one-on-one time with her son and asked Inko to send him down to her, claiming she needed him to fix something. Katsuki was busy hitting a large black punching bag in his room, his knuckles taped tightly to avoid injury. The bag bore the marks of his frustration, singed from the heat of his quirk as he thought about the person who had taken Izuku's heart. He was lost in his workout, focused on beating out the pain in his chest, until his mother entered the room, turning on the light to get his attention. He removed his earbuds and acknowledged her with a grunt. Mitsuki had been trying to get his attention, and as he unwrapped the tape from his hands, she asked if he was okay. He avoided her gaze, continuing to unwrap his hands with forceful tugs, and expressed his frustration about returning home just in time to see Izuku with someone else. He felt betrayed that everyone had kept it a secret from him. Mitsuki narrowed her eyes and reminded him that it would have been difficult to tell him since they hadn't heard from him in a while. She had not wanted to break his heart, knowing how much it would affect him, but she also recognized that both he and Izuku were adults now, and it was Izuku's place to share that news. Katsuki felt the weight of his mother's words, which struck him like a dagger. He understood all too well the truth behind them. It echoed painfully in his mind. Before he could respond, his mother continued, instructing him to clean up and head to his aunt's house for help with a task. He raised an eyebrow but mumbled in agreement as she left his room. Soon after, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 stood at her kitchen counter when she heard a heavy knock on the door. Opening it with a smile, she was met with a sight that tugged at her heart. To the outside world, he was the tough, explosive hero Katsuki Bakugo, but to her, he was still the misunderstood little boy whose angry scowl often concealed deeper hurt. Katsuki greeted her, mentioning that his mother had said she needed something. 𝐴𝐻𝐿's smile brightened as she took his arm and pulled him inside. She explained that there was a leak under the kitchen sink, something his father usually handled, but since he was away, she figured her favorite boy could help. Katsuki couldn't help but smile back at her. While Izuku Midoriya was the only one who could consistently draw that expression from him, his soft-hearted mother was a close second. He agreed to help and lay down on the kitchen floor to inspect the pipe. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but then he noticed a dent that seemed intentional. Furrowing his brow, he rolled his eyes, sensing a setup. Nevertheless, he reached for a wrench and began to fix the damage as 𝐴𝐻𝐿 pulled a tray from the oven. Curious, he asked how the damage had happened, noting the odd location and suggesting it looked like someone had hit it. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 continued moving around the kitchen, avoiding his gaze as she replied that it could have been anything. She then asked how he was settling back in after a few days. Katsuki shrugged, looking down at the wrench in his hand. He admitted he was doing all right. 𝐴𝐻𝐿, taking a seat in front of him, pressed further, sensing something was off. He mentioned seeing Deku that day, his tone almost childlike. 𝐴𝐻𝐿's green eyes softened as she inquired about the encounter, acknowledging it must have been difficult for both of them. Katsuki scoffed, looking away as he recalled the moment. He explained that things had been going well until 𝐿 showed up. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 stifled a giggle, clearing her throat as she recognized the name. Katsuki's scowl deepened as he confirmed it. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 expressed her sympathy, wishing they could have spoken before running into each other. Katsuki stood up, putting away the tools and washing his hands at the sink he had just fixed. He agreed that it might have been better, but it hadn't worked out that way. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 reassured him that 𝐿 was happy to see him and had missed him a lot, a sentiment that brought Katsuki a small measure of relief. As he dried his hands, he gazed out the kitchen window, reflecting on his meeting with Izuku. The hug they shared had indeed conveyed how much he had missed him. Turning back, he saw 𝐴𝐻𝐿 handing him a warm strawberry shortbread cookie, which brought back memories of his childhood. He grinned, breaking the cookie in half and savoring the taste. 𝐴𝐻𝐿, seeing the little boy she remembered, smiled back. After a moment of silence, Katsuki hesitantly asked if she liked 𝐿 for Deku. The question, filled with apprehension, made 𝐴𝐻𝐿's heart ache. She took a breath and described 𝐿 as sweet, polite, and easygoing, but then added that he was completely wrong for her son. Katsuki's eyes widened in surprise at her response. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 chuckled softly, explaining that Izuku already possessed those qualities and needed someone to challenge him, to bring out the sides of him that remained hidden. She emphasized that being with someone too similar could be boring. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, a smirk forming as he listened. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 continued, noting that Izuku had always been drawn to Katsuki's boldness and fearlessness, even when it intimidated him. Their dynamic was one of balance, where they brought out the best in each other. As Katsuki absorbed her words, he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 reassured him that while 𝐻𝐿 was a nice young man, he wasn't the right fit for Izuku. Katsuki nodded, a slight smile appearing as he glanced at the cookie in his hand. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 reminded him that this new relationship was different from the bond he and Izuku had shared since childhood. There was a significant difference between the two, and he kept that in mind. The blonde met her gaze, and for the first time that evening he felt a little better. He smiled, leaned over, and kissed her cheek. He thanked her for everything, including the cookies, smirking as he grabbed another one on his way to the door. Once he reached it, he turned back to her, remarking that all she had to do was ask to talk instead of causing a commotion to get him down there. She broke into a giggle, playfully denying his accusation. He needed to head home and promised to tell his mom that she would call tomorrow. Mitsuki was doing the dishes when she heard the door open. Before she could turn around, her large son, in a rare moment of affection, gave her a quick hug. He apologized, mentioning that Auntie would call tomorrow and that he was heading to bed. She turned in surprise, watching him ascend the stairs with a relaxed expression and a handful of cookies. She chuckled, shaking her head, knowing Auntie 𝐻𝐿𝐴 had once again diffused the brewing tension, just like always. Katsuki stood in front of his locker at the hero agency, having just put on the last piece of his hero suit. It had been a long time since he wore it, but after a few adjustments, it fit him perfectly. He glanced into the small mirror hanging in his locker, turning his face to the side to observe the scars on his strong profile. A deep sigh escaped him as he ran his fingers over the damaged skin. It looked better than it used to, but he knew the remnants of the past would always be there, a constant reminder of the battles he had faced, battles that had nearly taken his life until two heroes refused to let him fall forever. He despised the way the scars looked, how they made him feel self-conscious at times. Although it was better than it had been, he still felt uneasy about them. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence in the locker room. It was soft and slightly trembling, enough to make the tough blonde hero ache inside. It was Izuku, who commented that Katsuki's scars had healed well. Katsuki tensed, feeling a wave of emotions wash over him. He hesitated to turn around, causing Izuku to wonder if he had even been heard. Finally, he took a deep breath, shutting his locker with a forceful clang as he turned to face the green-eyed hero who had always held his heart. There were moments in life when a certain event or person could make one's heart feel like it was breaking and swelling with love simultaneously. It was a strange and agonizing feeling that Katsuki had to suppress with a cleared throat. He leaned back against the lockers, forcing a cocky smirk as he crossed his arms, stating that the scars were still there and still ugly. Izuku felt his heart ache, fighting back tears as he stepped closer to Katsuki. The blonde hero had always had a strong presence, drawing Izuku in since childhood. What he didn't realize was that Katsuki had always felt the same way about him. Izuku had never been as loud or confident, but he stood out in his own gentle and caring way, qualities that had always attracted Katsuki. After a moment of silence, Izuku gathered enough courage to lift his hand toward Katsuki's face, insisting that the scars were not ugly. However, before his trembling hand could reach its destination, Katsuki turned his face away, shaking his head and causing Izuku to slowly retract his hand. The blonde shifted his gaze to the ground, clearing his throat and telling Izuku not to do that. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes as he heard the defeated tone in Katsuki's voice. He wanted to reach out, to touch the strong, handsome jawline of the blonde hero, but he held back. He whispered that he never minded Katsuki's scars any more than Katsuki minded his own. Katsuki nodded, avoiding Izuku's gaze for a moment before finally meeting his eyes with a light scoff. He expressed that he minded his scars and questioned what Izuku's new boyfriend would think if he knew they were in the locker room together. The mention of X caused both of their hearts to ache. Katsuki could see the pain in Izuku's expression, and it was evident on both their faces. Emerald eyes looked away, tears threatening to spill. Izuku wanted to tell Katsuki that he didn't care what 𝐻𝐿 thought, but he held his tongue, knowing it wouldn't be fair to his current boyfriend. Finally, he returned his gaze to Katsuki's burning crimson eyes, which were searching for some sort of response. He revealed that there was so much he wanted to say the day before, but Katsuki had rushed off before he had the chance. Katsuki scoffed in annoyance, pointing out that Izuku had seemed busy when his date showed up and that he didn't want to interrupt. The bitterness in his tone revealed the anger and hurt simmering just below the surface. He wasn't trying to be difficult, his emotions simply overwhelmed him. Izuku looked hurt, lost, and ashamed all at once, and even though that expression pierced the blonde's heart, he couldn't reveal how deeply it affected him. Katsuki pushed himself off the lockers and headed for the door, raising a hand to signal his departure. He told Izuku that it was fine, that he didn't owe him anything, and that he needed to get out there. With that, he left, leaving behind a broken green-eyed hero. Katsuki made his way to a familiar office, stepping inside quietly. He was met with tired raven eyes from behind the desk. It had been a while since he had last spoken to Aizawa, especially after he had stormed in, demanding to know why he hadn't been informed about Izuku's relationship. He folded his arms across his chest, trying to mask the sheepish look behind his hero facade. He stated that he was there to get his patrol assignment. Aizawa nodded, standing up and sliding his hands into his pockets as he leaned against the corner of his desk. He mentioned that he had Katsuki's schedule ready but wanted to check in on him first. Aizawa understood that it was a lot to process, especially since it was Katsuki's first day back in hero work. Katsuki shrugged, insisting he was fine and ready to return to fighting villains. Aizawa chuckled lightly, recalling the familiar bravado of the cocky hero he had known since his teenage years. Aizawa acknowledged that while that might be true, it likely wasn't the only thing on Katsuki's mind. They held each other's gaze for a moment before Katsuki turned his head away, reiterating that he was fine. Aizawa expressed his hope that Katsuki truly was okay, emphasizing the importance of staying focused during their work. With determination in his eyes, Katsuki assured him that he could do his job and that he would be fine. He asked for his assignment so he could head out. Aizawa retrieved the information Katsuki sought and handed it to him. As Katsuki scanned the details, Aizawa mentioned that he would be patrolling with Kirishima that day but reminded him that there would be times he would have to work alongside Midoriya. He asked if Katsuki would be able to handle that. Katsuki looked up at his former teacher, a slow smirk forming on his face. He confidently declared that he had always been able to handle Izuku as long as he wasn't paired with that other hero, He assured Aizawa that there wouldn't be any trouble. Aizawa couldn't help but smile as he watched his old student leave the office. As soon as Katsuki stepped into the hallway, he ran into a familiar face. All Might greeted him with enthusiasm, asking if he was ready for the day. Katsuki returned the smile, expressing his eagerness to get back to work. All Might patted him on the back, sharing his excitement about seeing Katsuki back in action. He then inquired about how Katsuki was doing in other areas of his life. Katsuki rolled his eyes, frustrated by the repeated question. All Might explained that battles of the heart could be the toughest to fight, often catching people off guard. Katsuki swallowed hard, trying to suppress the emotions that threatened to surface. He shifted his gaze away, stating that he needed to get going. Just before he could walk away, All Might spoke again, clarifying that Izuku was not married and not close to that kind of commitment with Hero Katsuki halted, turning to meet All Might's deep blue eyes, which were filled with understanding. He smirked, curious about what the hero meant. All Might encouraged him, saying that some battles were worth fighting, no matter how tough they might be. He wished Katsuki good luck, expressing his support. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, asking if All Might meant his patrol or winning Izuku back. All Might simply smiled, affirming both. If Katsuki weren't so proud, he might have shed tears in that moment, but instead he grinned and nodded, pulling his hero mask over his eyes as he headed outside. His crimson eyes landed on Kirishima, who was leaning against a brick building, waiting for him. Katsuki smirked as he approached, teasing that Kirishima was stuck with him for the day and to try to keep up. Kirishima snapped to attention, his trademark grin spreading across his face. He was thrilled to have Katsuki back out on patrol with them. As they walked toward their section of the city, Kirishima suddenly spoke up, apologizing for not telling Katsuki about Izuku. He explained that he hadn't known how to bring it up, fearing it would hurt too much. He didn't want to leave such news in a voicemail and had hoped it was something Katsuki and Izuku would discuss when the time was right. Katsuki chuckled, cutting off his friend in typical Bakugo fashion. He teased Kirishima about his tendency to ramble, joking that he might have outdone Izuku in that regard. Kirishima raised an eyebrow, meeting Katsuki's gaze with a playful challenge. They both broke into light laughter as they continued down the sidewalk. Katsuki shrugged off Kirishima's apology, assuring him that he understood. He admitted that he was sorry for blowing up at him when he found out about Izuku. He hesitated, not wanting to finish his thought. Kirishima's expression softened as he patted Katsuki on the back, understanding the weight of the situation. They walked on for a while, the bond between them strengthening as they faced the challenges ahead. Eyes scanned the streets, ensuring everything was safe as thoughts drifted to random subjects. A moment of silence passed before Kirishima's curiosity got the better of him. He wondered about the situation with Midoriya, a question lingering in his mind. As he spoke, his crimson eyes fell upon a billboard featuring a green-eyed hero who held all the pieces of his heart. All Might's words echoed in his mind, and he smirked at his best friend, who raised an eyebrow in response. He declared his intent to deal with obstacles in his path, vowing to eliminate them entirely. Kirishima grinned, feeling the familiar energy of Katsuki Bakugo returning. Izuku sighed as he walked the last block before his shift ended. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, each step feeling like a burden. The green-eyed hero had not slept a wink the previous night, his thoughts consumed by the knowledge that Katsuki was back home. He had wanted to reach out to the blonde countless times but hesitated each time, unable to press send. The image of Katsuki's deep crimson eyes lingered in his mind, intensifying the ache to see him in person. Glancing up at the sky, he admired the sunset's deep red hues. His thoughts drifted back to their encounter in the locker room that morning, where he had been so close to Katsuki that he could smell the familiar scent of his quirk, soap, and shampoo. He had almost touched the strong jawline he missed dearly, but Katsuki had pulled away just before he could. The memory of Katsuki's voice echoed in his mind, filled with bitterness and hurt regarding Izuku's new relationship, which now twisted unease in his gut. The thought of Ethan, his current partner, made him feel slightly ill. He knew it wasn't Ethan's fault, but the feeling was undeniable and difficult to shake. Izuku sighed again, feeling his emotions pull him in countless directions. There was so much he wanted to say to Katsuki, but he struggled to find the words. His heart felt both broken and hopeful, leaving him uncertain about how to navigate his feelings. Suddenly, a voice behind him made him flinch. Ethan called out, jogging to catch up with him. Izuku turned slowly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and asked about Ethan's patrol, his tone lacking enthusiasm. Ethan smiled upon reaching him, noting the absence of their usual lunch together and the unanswered text. Izuku assured him he was fine, explaining he had been busy and left his phone in his locker. Ethan studied him, sensing something was off. When he expressed his frustration about Izuku's absence, Izuku's irritation flared. He pointed out that their lunch plans were never set in stone, questioning Ethan's attitude. Ethan, taken aback by Izuku's intensity, apologized, admitting his frustration had gotten the better of him. Just then, a commanding voice interrupted their conversation. Katsuki stepped between them, glaring at Ethan and addressing him directly. He then turned to Izuku, offering a brief smile before continuing on with Kirishima. Izuku felt a rush of emotions as he watched Katsuki walk away, his heart racing. Ethan, feeling tense from the interaction, asked if Katsuki had anything to do with Izuku's silence. Anger flickered in Izuku's eyes as he denied the implication, reiterating his earlier explanation. Sensing the conversation was heading in a negative direction, Ethan quickly backtracked, but Izuku remained annoyed. He announced he had to leave, not wanting to be late for his shift. As he walked away, Ethan called after him, hoping to see him later that night. Izuku shook his head, informing him he had plans with Sho. Kirishima walked alongside his friend, who had his hands tucked into the pockets of his hero suit, scanning their surroundings. He grinned at Katsuki, who seemed distracted. Kirishima couldn't help but tease, noting the earlier encounter. Katsuki shot him a sidelong glance, dismissing the comment. Kirishima laughed, shaking his head. He pointed out that Katsuki could have easily walked around Mito and Dash but chose to walk right through, getting a bit too close for comfort. Katsuki shrugged, insisting he had no idea what Kirishima was talking about. He claimed Mito was in his way and questioned why he should have to navigate around him. If Mito didn't want him too close to Deku, he should have moved. Kirishima snickered, playfully challenging his friend. He suggested that Katsuki's actions were intentional, meant to annoy Dash and catch Mito's attention. A hint of a smile appeared on Katsuki's face as he acknowledged that annoying Dash was a bonus but insisted he didn't need to try to get Deku to notice him. He believed Deku had always been aware of him. Kirishima chuckled, agreeing to disagree. After a brief silence, Katsuki shifted the topic, asking Kirishima what he thought of Dash. Kirishima shrugged, admitting he didn't know much about Dash. He described him as low-key and nice but somewhat dull. Katsuki smirked, suggesting that Dash was just as uninteresting as his quirk and hero name. Kirishima laughed, conceding that many were puzzled about why Mito had started seeing Dash. Katsuki nodded, feeling a pang in his chest at the mention of Mito's relationship. He too wondered why. Meanwhile, at the agency, Izuku was changing out of his hero suit when he heard his best friend's familiar voice. Shoto checked in on him, concerned about how he was feeling now that Bakugo was back. Izuku looked up, fatigue and sadness evident in his green eyes. He apologized for not responding to Shoto's text, explaining that the previous day had been overwhelming and he had little sleep. He mentioned a minor argument with Ethan and asked Shoto to go along with his story about having plans with him. Shoto smiled slightly, suggesting they grab some food and talk things over. Izuku agreed, feeling that it was better than going home alone to dwell on his thoughts. Later, they settled into a booth at a local restaurant. Shoto observed his weary friend and asked how he felt about Bakugo's return. Izuku traced patterns on his water glass, expressing that he felt like a mess. He admitted to being both happy and devastated to see Bakugo again. Shoto acknowledged the surprise of Bakugo's return, noting that he seemed to be doing better, which was encouraging. Izuku smiled, recalling how good Bakugo looked, almost whining about it as he leaned back dramatically. Shoto chuckled, listening as Izuku continued to express his thoughts. Izuku felt proud of Bakugo for returning to hero work, acknowledging the progress he had made. Shoto inquired if Izuku had a chance to really talk to Bakugo. Izuku sighed heavily, explaining that after their brief encounter the day before, Bakugo's mood had shifted when Ethan arrived, and he didn't want to talk anymore. Izuku felt a strong longing to take away Bakugo's pain, wishing he could help him. Shoto laughed, which made Izuku raise an eyebrow in confusion. Shoto clarified that he was amused by Izuku's description of the situation. He asked if Izuku had tried to talk to Bakugo since then, recalling how upset Bakugo had been when he first saw Izuku with Ethan. Izuku looked down at his glass, feeling the weight of the situation. He admitted that he hadn't had a real conversation with Bakugo since their brief exchange in the locker room that morning. He longed to be near Bakugo, even in silence. Shoto nodded, understanding the complexity of Izuku's feelings. He asked how Dash was handling everything. Izuku scrunched his face, expressing concern for Dash, who was trying to downplay the situation but seemed insecure and overbearing. Shoto recognized the challenge Dash faced, knowing how Izuku felt about Bakugo and how difficult it must be for Dash to measure up. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes as he confessed that Bakugo had meant everything to him. He felt guilty for his feelings towards Dash but couldn't help it now that Bakugo was back. Shoto smiled gently, encouraging Izuku to sort through his emotions. He reminded him that Bakugo needed to talk as well and mentioned that Bakugo was staying with his parents until he found a place. "Isn't that right down the street from your mom's house?" Green eyes widened in surprise, realizing that was where Katsuki was staying. "Yes, it was just 5 houses down." Shoto nodded, taking a sip from his water glass. He suggested that Izuku might want to drop by and check on her one day this week, his bicolor eyes holding his friend's gaze. Izuku allowed a smile to form, acknowledging that he should indeed visit. After they finished eating and chatting, they headed out. As Izuku stood in front of his apartment building, ready to say goodbye, Shoto began to walk away. Suddenly he heard his best friend's shaky voice asking if he thought Katsuki still loved him, even if it was just a little. Shoto turned around, memories flooding back of the broken, angry blonde who had gone on a rampage with a shattered heart and a fiery quirk that he and Kirishima had to contain. He smiled and assured Izuku that Katsuki cared more than just a little, wishing him a good night. Izuku sighed heavily as he sat at the kitchen table of his childhood home after dinner with his mom. It had been a few days since Shoto informed him that Katsuki was staying with his parents while searching for a place, encouraging Izuku to reach out to the blonde. However, he had lost his nerve on the way over and opted for dinner with his mom instead. Now, with a cup of tea and his favorite dessert in front of him, his thoughts drifted far away. Inko had been a bit surprised to see her son show up unannounced, but she recognized the look on his face that spoke volumes before he even uttered a word. She hadn't seen him since Katsuki returned, but she knew that was part of the reason for his visit. She wondered how long it would take for him to confront his feelings. She smiled at him from across the table, recalling how often he wore that same expression when it came to the explosive blonde just a few doors down. The two had always shared deep feelings for each other, and despite their attempts to hide it, it was evident. Communication had always been a challenge for them, especially when emotions ran so strong that words felt inadequate. It could be frustrating and overwhelming, leading them to avoid dealing with their feelings. She had witnessed them both run from their emotions over the years, and she understood that her son was sitting there now because he had chosen to run once again. Clearing her throat, she took a sip of her tea and remarked on his quiet demeanor. Izuku finally met her gaze, offering a weary smile and apologizing for being tired. She nodded, acknowledging that he indeed looked exhausted, especially after working so much over the past 6 months. She suggested he should slow down, but then added that doing so might mean confronting all the feelings he had been suppressing for 2 years. His eyes widened in surprise as she smiled knowingly. She asked if he had spoken to Katsuki since his return, expressing concern for how he was feeling. Izuku sighed, tears forming in his eyes as he admitted he had talked to Katsuki a few times, but not about the important things. She gently prompted him, and he shook his head, wiping his eyes. Every time he tried to talk, it felt like something got in the way. She mentioned the name Ethan, watching as he cringed slightly, admitting that sometimes it was indeed a barrier. She smiled gently, acknowledging that it was something he would eventually have to address. However, she emphasized that he and Katsuki had so much left unresolved, and neither would find peace until they confronted their feelings. A tear slid down his cheek as he confessed his struggle. He felt guilty for wanting Katsuki back while seeing someone else. His mother chuckled softly, even as her heart ached for him. She reminded him that Katsuki was his first and deepest love, the one he had never truly gotten over. Those words broke down the emotional wall he had built, and tears flowed freely as he admitted his guilt. Inko reassured him that Ethan had known what he was getting into when he pressured Izuku into dating. He had accepted that Izuku had unresolved feelings for Katsuki, and now he would have to face the consequences. She advised him to take the time he needed to sort through his emotions, noting that if Ethan truly cared, he would be patient and understanding. If not, that would reveal a lot about their relationship, and he should not ignore the signs. With teary eyes, Izuku lifted his head, ready to confront the truth of his feelings. "What do you mean by that last part?" she asked, taking a sip from her cup. She shrugged, unsure how to explain. She simply stated that she wasn't certain Ethan, despite his pleasant demeanor, always had his best interests at heart. He raised an eyebrow, curious about her reasoning. She smiled knowingly, attributing her insight to a mother's intuition. Then she shifted the conversation back to Katsuki, reminding him that Katsuki was grappling with just as many emotions, if not more. He had endured severe injuries, faced post-traumatic stress, and left behind his town, his job, and everyone he loved, including Izuku. Katsuki had worked hard to recover, returning home and to his hero duties, but he had to readjust to everything while also dealing with the guilt of leaving Izuku behind and the fear that he might have lost him forever. She emphasized that Katsuki was hurting just as much as Izuku, carrying a heavy burden. Izuku nodded, allowing his emotions to surface. He understood that Katsuki was in pain and still trying to heal. He wished Katsuki would let him help, just as he had wanted to back then. She took his hand, acknowledging his pain. She understood how much it hurt him as well. She pointed out that Katsuki had always struggled to express his feelings. Proud and determined to be number one in Izuku's eyes, he had never wanted Izuku to see his flaws. To Katsuki, his trauma felt like a flaw, pushing him away even as his heart longed for closeness. She believed that if Izuku continued to show him he cared and wanted to help, Katsuki would eventually come around. They would need to talk eventually, and she felt Katsuki knew that too. Patience would be essential for both of them. Izuku recognized her wisdom, grateful for her support. He stood and wrapped her in a hug, thanking her for always being there for him. She gently patted him, affirming her commitment to listen and guide him, expressing her love. After a couple of hours of conversation, Izuku prepared to head home. As he reached the bottom step outside, his mother offered one last piece of advice for the evening. She reminded him that running away would only wear him out and that it was never the solution to the problems that lingered behind. She believed Katsuki had learned that lesson after leaving home, and she hoped Izuku would too. He smiled and shook his head at his mother's seemingly endless wisdom, assuring her he understood. He loved her and promised to talk soon. With his hands tucked into his jeans pockets, he took a deep breath of the warm air and began his walk home. Though he could have driven, he preferred the walk. His emerald eyes scanned the quiet sidewalks, but in the distance, he could hear echoes of his younger self and a blonde boy cheering about their latest all-might mission and dreaming of becoming heroes together. He recalled Katsuki's laughter and excitement as they raced home, hand in hand, eager to watch videos and enjoy snacks their mothers had bought for them at the convenience store. They had lived in a world of their own back then, bound by an unbreakable connection that, despite years of confusion and bullying, had never truly been severed, even if it had frayed at the edges. As he gazed up at the night sky, he wondered if that bond would ever return to what it once was. His attention shifted to a house just a few feet away, one that housed a blonde hero. The sight alone made his heart ache. Unbeknownst to him, at that moment, past traumas were wreaking havoc in the mind of the blonde hero asleep inside. The ground trembled in his dreams, and the heat felt like it was searing his skin. He was drenched in sweat, which was beneficial for his quirks, but it blurred his vision, mixing with BLD. He stumbled, struggling to stay upright as taunting laughter and screams echoed in his ears, drowning out the ringing from his own explosions. A name echoed in his mind, one that stirred deep emotions within him, a name that should never have been uttered by his enemy. He stood, BLD and fury in his eyes, shouting back until his throat was raw and his lungs ached. He vowed that this villain would never harm what belonged to him, that he would blast him and any other threat to the depths of despair, even if it meant sacrificing himself in the process. His bones ached as he forced himself to stand, smoke billowing from his battered body as his quirks spiraled out of control. He struggled to focus through the sweat and BLD in his eyes, but flashes of green eyes kept appearing in his mind. Even amidst the chaos, the sight made his heart ache with every beat. He wondered if he would ever see those eyes again, if he would ever get to embrace that hero he had finally claimed as his own. Tears mixed with sweat and BLD as he steadied himself to unleash one final blast, shattering a bone in his arm. But a counterattack sent him sprawling, launching him far across the battlefield. His vision blurred, and he felt himself fading, aware that he was on the brink of death. Katsuki thrashed in his bed, battling the nightmare that haunted him almost every night. He fought to wake up, caught between the edge of consciousness and the hell he was trapped in, as both worlds pulled at him relentlessly. Outside, on the sidewalk beneath his open bedroom window, Izuku stood with wide eyes, hearing the heartbreaking sounds of the blonde hero's tortured cries in his sleep. His heart raced at the distressing noises, breaking with each beat as he turned and rushed up Katsuki's front steps. With a shaky hand, he began to knock on the door. When he received no answer and noticed the absence of a car in the driveway, he made a decision. He reached under the front door mat to retrieve a key that had been there since his childhood. His hands trembled as he struggled to unlock the door, anxiety coursing through him as he thought about the turmoil he sensed in the upstairs bedroom. Once inside, he hurried up the stairs, taking them two at a time without bothering to remove his shoes. He paused at the door, his heart racing, unsure if he should just burst in. The sounds coming from within were painful, piercing through him like blades. Holding his breath, he slowly opened the door and peered into the dimly lit room. Katsuki's TV flickered in the darkness, illuminating the scene just enough for Izuku to see him twisting in bed, the covers and pillows strewn across the floor. Even in the low light, he could see the sweat glistening on Katsuki's skin. The desperate cries of "No" and "I can't die yet" filled the air, accompanied by other inaudible sounds. There was a crackling intensity in those screams, and Izuku felt the weight of Katsuki's tears, even without light. As he rushed to Katsuki's bedside, a chilling shout from a twisted dream made him stop, tears streaming down his face. Kacchan. Kacchan, it's okay. Please wake up. It's me, Dad. I'm here." He knelt beside the bed, his heart breaking at the sight of Katsuki's distress. A gentle touch on his sweat-drenched arm finally broke through the darkness, causing Katsuki's crimson eyes to snap open. He sat up abruptly, breathing heavily and whispering a string of curses. It took him a moment to realize that green eyes were kneeling by his bed, and a wave of horror washed over him as he understood what Izuku had just witnessed. Deku. Katsuki sat there, wide-eyed, his breath still rapid and unsteady. His heart pounded in his chest, echoing in his ears as he stared at the silhouette beside him. The room was mostly dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the TV, but he sensed someone was there. He questioned whether this was just another nightmare, one he had experienced before, where he could hear a familiar voice and see those green eyes that both comforted and ignited something within him, only for that figure to vanish as soon as he reached for it. The figure remained still, and Katsuki struggled to calm his breathing. He almost convinced himself he was still dreaming until a soft voice shattered his thoughts. "Kacchan, are you okay?" The question hit Katsuki like a freight train, twisting his insides and making him feel nauseous. He never wanted Izuku to witness him in such a vulnerable state, never wanted those deep green eyes to see him like this, filled with pity and pain. Walls of defense slammed down around him as he pulled himself to sit on the edge of his bed, turning his back to Izuku. Clearing his throat, he spoke quietly in the dark, resting his elbows on his thighs and running his hands through his damp blonde hair. "What are you doing here, Deku?" Izuku felt a deep ache in his heart at the broken tone, one filled with embarrassment and shame. He fought against the lump in his throat as he replied, "I was at my mom's for dinner. I decided to walk home, and when I passed your house." He hesitated, sensing that this might not go over well. He could already feel the tension in the air, but he continued. "Your window was open and Katsuki finished for him with a bitter scoff. "And you heard my nightmare?" Izuku swallowed hard, recalling the painful cries he had just heard. He was about to respond when Katsuki spoke again. "How much did you hear?" The question felt pointless. Even one broken scream was too many. Izuku struggled to find the right words, ones that wouldn't push this prideful blonde away. "I'm not sure. Enough to know it was pretty intense for you," he said gently. Katsuki chuckled bitterly. "Yeah, you could say that. But that doesn't explain why you're here, especially since the way back to your place is in the opposite direction." Izuku felt caught, realizing that it was true. There was no reason for him to be near Katsuki's house if he was only walking home. It would have been out of his way. "I guess I just wanted to take a walk around our old neighborhood for a while. There are lots of memories here. When I heard you, I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Katsuki remained silent, contemplating Izuku's response. There were indeed many memories tied to this place, childhood moments when they were inseparable, always hand in hand, exploring and dreaming of being heroes. There were bitter memories of middle school, where he had hurt the one he cared for before learning his lesson the hard way. High school had brought a rebuilding of their friendship, blossoming into love, leading to moments of holding hands as they walked into their parents' houses to announce their relationship. Now, those memories felt heavy. Izuku broke the silence. "Are they always that bad? Do you get them often?" Katsuki visibly cringed at the question. He wanted to lie, to say this was the first nightmare in a long time, to downplay its severity, but lying to Izuku had never been easy. He shrugged, avoiding the question that screamed for the truth. It was just a bad nightmare, Deku. He reassured himself that he wouldn't do it, that he would never lie to Izuku while they were still together. Yet here he was, another promise he couldn't keep, just like the one he made to always be there, never leave, and always love him. That last promise still rang true from the deepest corners of his broken heart. Izuku moved a little closer from his spot on the floor, shifting slowly as if he didn't want to scare off a frightened, wounded animal. He expressed concern, noting that Katsuki didn't seem fine and that it was okay if he wasn't. The blonde tensed at the hint of pity in Izuku's voice. "I'm fine," he insisted, almost following it with the words that he was used to it, but that would mean revealing that this was a normal occurrence for him. Izuku studied Katsuki's large back in the dark. He could tell by Katsuki's posture, his head down and shoulders slumped, that it was a lie. He shifted back slightly, reaching for the lamp, but before he could turn it on, Katsuki spoke up, asking him to leave it off. Katsuki would have begged those words if he had to, pleading that Izuku not see the mess he had become. He wanted to spare Izuku the pain he knew was there, even in the dark. Izuku slowly moved his hand away, complying with Katsuki's request, even as it deepened the ache inside him. He made another attempt to get closer but stopped short, not wanting to upset the explosive hero. He hesitantly asked if Katsuki wanted to talk about it, his voice almost a whisper. Katsuki chuckled, though it lacked humor, and firmly stated that he didn't want to talk about it, think about it, or have Izuku deal with it. Izuku replied that he didn't mind and would really like the chance to be there for Katsuki in any way he allowed. He had always wanted that. The words were sweet and gentle but laced with hurt, a reminder of the pain that Katsuki had caused when he pushed Izuku away after the war. It felt like razors against his skin. A storm brewed in Katsuki's chest, one he couldn't control. He had never been good with his emotions, and tonight's nightmare, combined with his feelings for Izuku and everything that lay heavily between them, made him anxious. Izuku reluctantly reached out, his fingers moving in the dim light, ready to grip Katsuki's shirt. But sensing it, Katsuki stood up abruptly and walked to the other side of the room. Izuku watched in the dark, feeling the distance between them. Katsuki always seemed just out of reach, so close yet worlds away, and it brought tears to his eyes. Katsuki ran a hand through his hair and leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, far enough away that Izuku couldn't see the pain and fear in his crimson eyes. He remarked that it was late and suggested that Izuku should be home, questioning if his friend would be worried about him. The words were bitter, striking both of them like a boomerang, causing pain to ricochet between their chests. Izuku fought against the sting in his heart, feeling a surge of anger. He stated clearly that he and Dash didn't live together, and that Dash didn't own him or dictate what he could do or how long he could stay. Katsuki wanted to smirk, almost allowing it to show on his face. If it had been another time, he might have told Izuku that he used to own him, that without even trying, Izuku was his completely. Just a look or a whisper could make Izuku fold, but the truth was that green eyes held the same power, even if the hero by the bed was unaware of it. Suddenly, words struck Katsuki's mind, causing his already broken heart to shatter further. Izuku began to express that it had been him until Katsuki had pushed him away. He didn't get to finish before tears streamed down Katsuki's face, overtaken by regret, pain, and anger. Katsuki's voice broke as he confronted Izuku, acknowledging that he knew he had messed everything up, that he thought about it every day. He hated himself for the tears in Izuku's eyes across the room. Izuku stood quickly, his own tears flowing down his cheeks. He tried to explain that it wasn't what he meant, that his words hadn't come out right. He attempted to step closer, but Katsuki raised a hand to stop him, asking him to please go. Izuku felt a sense of panic rising within him, not wanting to leave. He took a step closer, almost reaching Katsuki again, but the blonde stepped back, pleading for him to leave. Katsuki was afraid he would break down completely, his resolve to hold back his emotions crumbling. Izuku's heart was breaking. He wanted nothing more than to close the distance and be held in Katsuki's strong arms. This was not how he wanted things to go, but he could tell by Katsuki's tone that he couldn't push any further tonight. Taking a trembling step back, Izuku reached the door. It was Katsuki who felt a surge of panic, almost reaching out to pull him back, scared that if he didn't, he might not see those green eyes again. But he fights it, pride keeping him rooted in place. The green-eyed hero turns his back to the blonde, opening the door but pausing. There is so much he wants to say, to scream, to cry until it sinks into the explosive hero's mind that he is not alone and doesn't have to be. He even opens his mouth to speak, but the words die on his tongue, knowing tonight is not the night. So, he says nothing, exiting in complete silence and closing the door behind him. That silence carries the weight of 1,000 screams as Katsuki grabs a glass of water from his dresser and hurls it across the room, shattering it like the heart he holds in his chest. Frustration spills over as he cries out, backing up and sliding down the wall, tears streaming down his face. He pulls his knees up, resting his forehead on them as he breaks down, overwhelmed by nightmares and the weakness he feels. He mourns the distance he keeps from the green eyes he desperately wants near him, the loss of the only one he has ever loved, knowing he is the one who caused the fracture. He breaks because the thing that made him whole just walked out with a broken heart, and he couldn't gather himself enough to stop him, to let him stay, to let him in. Alone in his room, he falls apart. What he doesn't know is that just outside his bedroom window sits a green-eyed hero who has quietly used his quirk to launch himself onto the porch roof, hidden from view. He leans against the house, listening to every broken curse and cry. His heart aches in a way that feels like it might break his chest open as he covers his mouth to muffle his own sobs at the sounds from the bedroom. On a childhood street filled with memories, two heroes silently break just out of each other's reach. It has been over a week since Izuku's encounter with the fiery blonde who was suffering from a traumatic dream, almost 2 weeks to be exact. Over a week since Izuku had seen Katsuki because they were on different shifts at the agency, and in that time, he has thought about it almost every day. He wanted to text the blonde several times to check on him but fought the urge, wanting to give Katsuki space after such an event. He knows the blonde better than most, in ways no one else ever has or will, and he understands that Katsuki's pride took a hard hit the night he saw him breaking down. A heavy sigh escapes him as he gazes up at the sky with a wandering mind while on patrol. He is tired, having not slept well, and some nights not at all. Part of that is due to thoughts of the blonde hero, and part of it is from pushing himself too hard, leaving no time to think. He is currently on patrol with Dash, who insisted they pull a double shift together. Izuku had considered calling off that day, wanting to stay home and sleep for at least 12 hours. However, when he told Ethan of his plans, he was guilted into working with words about spending time together and the importance of maintaining his #1 hero rank. Izuku shifts his gaze back to the sidewalk, annoyed with himself for agreeing to this, feeling like he can hardly keep his eyes open. It's such a nice day, isn't it? We should definitely do something after work, Ethan says with a grin, barely shifting his eyes to the worn-out green-eyed hero. Izuku yawns. Yes, it's warm, which is making me sleepy. I really don't feel up to doing anything tonight, though. I need some rest, I'm sort of running on empty here, and if I'm not careful, that's going to start affecting my work. I can't help anyone if I'm this sluggish. Ethan finally looks down at him and pats his back. You'll be fine. You're tougher than that. You just need a cold drink and maybe some food. Besides, shouldn't you want to hang out with your boyfriend? Izuku stops, pinching the bridge of his nose in tired frustration. Don't do that. Ethan raises a brow. Do what? Tired eyes meet the other heroes. Don't flip it and try to make me feel bad. You do that a lot. The dark-haired male shakes his head. That's not true. I'm not flipping anything. Izuku sighs. It is true, plus you just made it sound like I haven't spent any time with you. We worked together almost every day this week, and I went out to dinner with you twice. I'm entitled to be tired and need a night away from everything without feeling bad about it. Ethan looks away with a grunt. Yeah, alright. We still have about 6 hours left of patrol, so we should eat and then get back to it. He takes Izuku by the hand. In a cafe close to the hero agency, one that many heroes frequently visit, sits a blonde hero and his best friend on their lunch break. Kirishima watches the blonde drink his iced coffee, noting the distant look in his eyes. Hey man, you alright? You've been quiet today. Come to think of it, You've been kind of quiet all week. Katsuki meets his gaze after taking a bite of his sandwich, rolling his eyes. I can't win. Sometimes you complain when I'm too loud, and now you're saying I'm too quiet. The redhead chuckles. Yeah, you know what I mean. Seems like something's bugging you. Katsuki smirks. Yeah, currently it's the annoying guy across from me while I'm trying to eat. Kirishima shakes his head, amusement lighting up his features. Not very manly, man, not at all. But I was wondering if you've been able to talk to Izuku at all. The blonde feels a sharp twist in his gut, and his expression changes completely, letting Kirishima know something has gone wrong. Katsuki wipes his mouth, tossing his napkin onto the other half of his now uneaten sandwich, feeling his appetite vanish. He shrugged, picking up his coffee. It wasn't really a good night, unless one counted the time he had a troubling nightmare and someone came to wake him up. Kirishima's eyes softened with concern. It was tough, and he felt sorry that his friends still dealt with those nightmares. But he figured it was Midoriya, who was incredibly understanding, so it probably wasn't as bad as it seemed. Katsuki's smile faded as he noticed Kirishima's expression shift. Something was clearly wrong. He narrowed his eyes, scowling at his best friend. It was frustrating to think that his troubles were so easily guessed. Kirishima raised an eyebrow, curious about what had happened. Katsuki turned away, clearly annoyed by the question. Kirishima rolled his eyes, sensing that Katsuki was reluctant to. He pressed on, wanting to know more about what had transpired. There was a moment of silence, and Katsuki's expression revealed that he didn't want to revisit the memory. His sharp gaze remained fixed on the window as he spoke. He explained that Midoriya had been walking by his parents' place and heard him during one of those intense dreams. They hit him hard, leaving his mind in chaos. The last person he wanted to see him in that state was Deku. He had been shocked to find Deku in his room when he finally came to his senses. It was embarrassing, and he didn't want Deku to know how bad it could get. He had made him leave, even though it was incredibly difficult. Kirishima understood. He nodded gently, speaking softly so no one else could hear. Maybe it would be beneficial to have someone there during those moments, especially someone like Midoriya, who genuinely wanted to help. Katsuki's thoughts drifted to the green-haired hero who had pleaded to be there for him after the war. He could almost hear Deku's voice echoing that same sentiment from last night. He struggled to maintain his composure, feeling the weight of his emotions. It wasn't easy, he finally admitted. He wished it were, but it wasn't, especially when it came to Deku. Kirishima remained quiet for a moment, understanding that Katsuki never wanted to appear weak in front of those who admired him. Kirishima expressed his hope that Katsuki could overcome those feelings, as he wanted to see him and Midoriya work things out and get back together. Katsuki's heart sank as he shrugged, his gaze downcast. He wasn't sure if that was what was best for Deku or if he was ready for it himself. Kirishima was taken aback. Just weeks ago, Katsuki had been determined to win Deku back. Giving up wasn't like him, and he urged his friend not to start now. Katsuki raised an eyebrow at Kirishima's outburst, but before he could respond, his attention was drawn to the door. His expression darkened as he saw Ethan, the dark-haired guy dating Izuku. Anger surged through him, and he felt his jaw tense as he watched Ethan enter the cafe. Kirishima sensed the tension and turned in his chair, realizing the source of Katsuki's anger. He tapped his friend under the table, urging him to keep his cool. Katsuki's gaze remained fixed on Ethan, who seemed to be enjoying himself as he pulled Izuku in close and kissed him, catching Izuku completely off guard. Katsuki's eyes widened, the overwhelming scent of nitroglycerin filling the air, causing other heroes across the room to glance in his direction. It was almost unbearable, and he felt a surge of heat as his fists clenched, itching to unleash an explosion that would shake the cafe to its core. A song played in the background, its lyrics echoing in his mind and intensifying his frustration. The words swirled around him, amplifying every emotion as he watched the scene unfold, pushing him closer to his breaking point. He knew this was intentional, a provocation meant to send a message. Just when it seemed like he might lose control, he saw Izuku push Ethan away, his green eyes narrowed with anger. Katsuki's heart sank as he caught the apologetic look Izuku shot him before turning back to Ethan, confronting him about the kiss. Ethan feigned innocence, claiming he simply wanted to show affection. Before Izuku could respond, Kirishima called out to him, inviting him to join their table. Izuku smiled at his friend, considering the invitation. But as he stepped forward, Ethan gripped his hand tightly, pulling him back. Katsuki's eyes narrowed sharply, displeased with how Izuku was being treated. As Ethan turned to lead Izuku away, Katsuki's voice cut through the tension. He questioned whether Izuku couldn't sit with his friends. Kirishima tensed as he observed Katsuki, who remained unfazed while speaking. Ethan turned around, a forced smile on his face. He assured Katsuki that there were no issues, just that they had already made plans. Katsuki, however, was not one to back down easily. He pointed out that they had come to eat lunch together, and a seating arrangement shouldn't change that. Kirishima interjected, suggesting that it was all right and that they could plan for next time. Izuku met Kirishima's gaze and smiled faintly, trying to suppress his own exhaustion. He promised to make it a point to have lunch with both of them next week. Katsuki held Izuku's gaze, a slow smile forming on his lips, declaring that he would hold Izuku to that promise. Feeling a twinge of relief, Izuku nodded with a smile and walked to a nearby table alone, his annoyance growing. Dash sat across from him, noticing the anger in Izuku's green eyes. When Dash asked what was wrong, Izuku shook his head, expressing his fatigue and longing to simply eat and go home. He felt too drained to finish his shift. Ethan rolled his eyes, though he smiled, encouraging Izuku to stick it out and suggesting coffee to perk him up, insisting they should go out that night. Izuku tried to protest, but Dash stood up, declaring he would get Izuku's coffee and food. As Izuku sat there with his eyes downcast, his mother's words echoed in his mind, warning him that Ethan might not always have his best interests at heart. Katsuki, close enough to overhear, noticed the exhaustion in Izuku's eyes, dark circles and bloodshot whites telling a story of fatigue. Anger surged through him once more. Dash returned, placing a can of coffee and a salad in front of Izuku. Izuku scrunched his face at the sight, prompting Katsuki to suppress a smile while Kirishima chuckled. Katsuki observed that Izuku wouldn't be pleased unless the coffee had cream and sugar. Izuku confirmed his dislike for the black coffee, twisting the can in his hands. Dash insisted that it was better for him, urging him to just try it. Suddenly, a can of sweet cream coffee was slammed down on the table, startling both Izuku and Dash. They looked up to see a tall blonde hero with anger in his crimson eyes, locking onto Ethan. Without a word, Katsuki took the can of black coffee from Izuku, took a sip, and tossed it into a nearby trash can. He shoved his hands into his pockets, sending a fierce glare before heading outside. Izuku felt a flutter in his chest at Katsuki's protective action as he watched the blonde leave, a sense of longing swelling within him. Katsuki leaned against the cafe wall outside, trying to calm the heat rising in his chest. His best friend joined him, asking if he was all right. Katsuki closed his eyes, leaning back as he expressed his disdain for Ethan's behavior. Kirishima furrowed his brow, admitting he hadn't realized how pushy Ethan was with Izuku. Katsuki warned that if Ethan continued, he would soon get to know him better. Dash emerged with Izuku trailing behind. Izuku mumbled his confusion about why they even bothered to get lunch if he couldn't finish. Dash insisted they needed to return to work. Izuku sighed, reiterating his exhaustion. Dash insisted he looked more awake now as he began to cross the street. However, Izuku was so tired that he wasn't paying attention. Just as he began to cross, a car approached, honking loudly. He widened his eyes, thinking it was the end, when suddenly, a blonde hero snatched him back from the brink of danger, pulling him into his arms. Izuku's heart raced from the scare as he looked up into Katsuki's wide yet angry crimson eyes. Katsuki scolded him for not paying attention and for almost getting hit, emphasizing the danger of not using a crosswalk. He demanded to know why Izuku looked so exhausted, expressing his fear and frustration. Still in Katsuki's grasp, Izuku struggled to respond, apologizing and admitting his fatigue due to lack of rest. Katsuki clicked his tongue, insisting that Izuku needed to go home and sleep, as the job was too risky for someone so worn out. Dash returned, concerned and questioning what had happened. Katsuki stepped in front of Izuku, confronting Dash about his negligence. He demanded to know if Dash had truly seen how exhausted Izuku was, accusing him of being selfish. He insisted that Izuku should have been home hours ago and criticized Dash for leading him across a busy street without proper attention. Katsuki's crimson eyes turned back to Izuku, commanding him to go home immediately. He offered to inform Aizawa that Izuku was done for the day, urging him to rest. Ethan glared at Katsuki, suggesting that Izuku didn't need him telling him what to do. Katsuki shot back, asserting that Izuku clearly needed someone looking out for him, especially since Ethan wasn't doing it. He turned back to Izuku, repeating his order for him to go home. Katsuki turned on his heel, striding away with a fist clenched tightly, feeling the heat radiate against his skin. He didn't need to look back to know those green eyes were watching him. Despite his thoughts from the other night, he was determined to keep their gaze fixed on him once more. Powerful hands struck a heavy black sandbag with a steady rhythm. Sweat trickled down the blonde hero's face and bare chest as music pulsed through his earbuds, energizing him for the challenge ahead. It had been a few days since Katsuki encountered Izuku and the person he was dating. He had been in a foul mood ever since, plagued by nightmares and a lack of sleep that only worsened his state. The word dating echoed in Katsuki's mind like a persistent headache, making him feel nauseous and uneasy. He had been foolish to think Izuku wouldn't move on after he had been absent for 2 years. It was only natural that someone would try to take his place beside the green-eyed hero, who had so much to offer that it would take an entire notebook, like the one Izuku scribbled in, to list everything. In Katsuki's eyes, Izuku had always been perfect, even when he didn't act that way. It was inevitable that someone else would recognize that and act on it. Katsuki knew he shouldn't be angry, hurt, or bitter. After all, he was the one who had ended things and walked away without a word for 2 years. Yet, he felt all those emotions twisting inside him daily, creating a storm within his chest. His thoughts shifted to the boy Izuku was with, someone he couldn't stand. He hated his very existence, the air he breathed, and if he were honest, he would love to see him disappear. Katsuki loathed everything about him, and he knew that his feelings of hatred were genuine. With heavy hands wrapped in workout tape, he began to strike the black punching bag hanging from his ceiling with increasing intensity as these thoughts churned in his mind. He recalled the other day at lunch when that boy had been pushy with Izuku, telling him where to sit, what to eat, and what not to drink as if he had any right to dictate Izuku's choices. Exhausted green eyes flashed in Katsuki's mind as he punished the bag with heated punches. He could see Izuku walking carelessly into traffic, and he imagined himself lunging forward, gripping the green hero's suit just in time to pull him back to safety before any harm could come to him. He could see the surprise and relief in Izuku's tired eyes, an apology lingering on his lips for the scare and trouble he had caused, but all he could say was that he was just so tired. Katsuki's punches grew harder, the tape around his hands beginning to warp under the heat of his frustration. A question began to P&D in his overworked mind. Why was that nerd so tired, and why didn't that guy he was with notice? Did he simply not care? A different image flashed in his anger-filled mind. He saw that boy returning after the danger had almost struck, asking Izuku what had happened. He should have known if he had stayed by Izuku's side, but he had rushed ahead, leaving Izuku vulnerable. This thought ignited a deeper hatred within Katsuki. With one final slam into the bag, it tore open, spilling sand across his bedroom floor. He stepped back, breathing heavily, wiping the sweat from his forehead and cursing at the mess he had made, still unaware of how angry he had become. His crimson eyes shifted to the clock as he wiped down the sweat from his neck and face, realizing he had a patrol shift to prepare for that evening. After a shower and cleaning up the sand, he found himself at the agency, finishing up with his hero suit. Behind him, a monotone voice broke the silence. "So, I guess it's you and me tonight, Bakugo?" Katsuki turned around, adjusting the belt on his hero suit to see 𝐀𝐮𝐴 standing there with a hint of a smile on his mostly emotionless face. The blonde smirked, rolling his eyes. "Great, they put me with your weird self today." 𝐀𝐮𝐴 nodded, that slight smile growing. "I missed you too, let's go." Katsuki shook his head in amusement as they headed out on evening patrol. They walked the streets in silence at first, keeping an eye on their surroundings, before Shoto initiated conversation. Have you found an apartment yet? I'm sure you're ready to live on your own again. Katsuki nodded. Yeah, actually, I found something just yesterday. The place will be ready to move into this weekend. I'm definitely ready to get out from under the old hag. I forgot how annoying she was. Shoto chuckled lightly. She probably thinks the same about you. Katsuki glanced at Shoto, raising an eyebrow before a slow smirk formed on his face. Icy hot, I didn't think you had it in you. I'm a little proud right now. Shoto laughed softly. Thanks, I'll try to keep up with your insults tonight so I don't fall behind. Katsuki broke into laughter. About time your expressionless self got a sense of humor. They both shared a light laugh until Katsuki's gaze landed on a sight that made every muscle in his body tense. When Shoto caught the scent of nitroglycerin, he began to search for the source. It didn't take long for him to spot his best friend and the boy, Ethan, walking on patrol together across the street. He glanced at Katsuki, whose jaw was clenched tightly and eyes filled with a dangerous intensity. Shoto sighed, placing a hand on Katsuki's shoulder. Sorry. I'm sure that's difficult for you. Katsuki met Shoto's gaze briefly as they continued on their route. Yeah, you have no idea. A moment of silence passed before Katsuki voiced his thoughts. Hey, Icy Hot, you're Deku's best friend. What do you think of that guy he's with? Shoto kept his eyes ahead, a slight smile on his lips. You mean Dash? Katsuki shrugged. Like I said, that guy. Shoto chuckled softly. Honestly, I'm not sure. I feel like none of us know him very well. After you left, Dash made his presence known, but only to Midoriya. At that time, Midoriya was so upset over your departure that he sank pretty low. Ethan had been talking to Midoriya almost constantly, but it felt forced at times, as if he was trying to monopolize their conversations. Anger twisted in Katsuki's chest as he questioned what that meant. Shoto shrugged, explaining that whenever Midoriya's friends, including him, tried to help, Ethan would intervene, pushing them aside. Whenever they wanted time with Midoriya, Ethan would claim they had plans. Midoriya, worn down from being upset, simply went along with it. Shoto felt that Ethan was controlling in many ways, masking it with exaggerated kindness. Katsuki stopped walking, his eyes filled with anger. He demanded to know if Shoto had told Midoriya he didn't trust Ethan. Shoto met Katsuki's gaze, admitting he had expressed his concerns about their compatibility. He believed Midoriya was aware of it too but continued seeing Ethan out of guilt. Once Katsuki returned home, Shoto hoped things would resolve themselves. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, asking what that meant. Shoto's serious expression softened slightly as he explained that he wanted Midoriya to be happy, and he believed there was only one way to achieve that. He didn't need to say it aloud. Katsuki already understood. However, he warned that the path to happiness might get messy before it improved, but he was confident it would work out. Katsuki studied Shoto, taking in his words. A smirk formed on his face, and he chuckled, surprised by how much Shoto had shared. He wondered if Shoto was actually rooting for him to get back together with Midoriya. Shoto smiled in response, putting his hands in his pockets as they resumed walking. To Katsuki's surprise, he found himself enjoying the conversation with Shoto more than he had anticipated. However, their patrol took an unexpected turn when a heavy thunderstorm swept in. The thunder crashed, echoing memories of a battlefield from 2 years prior. Katsuki's heart raced, his eyes widening as sweat broke out and his core trembled, making him unsteady on his feet. The thunder sounded like the explosions from that day, and the lightning reminded him of when he had been struck down. He recalled the flashes of green and yellow, remembering how Midoriya had gone into a fierce mode upon seeing him on the ground. He also remembered Dunce, trying to protect the city with a force field. It had rained then, cooling his burning skin, but he had cursed it, knowing it would weaken his quirk. Shoto noticed Katsuki's distress. He had been calling his name, but he could tell Katsuki was lost in his mind. Shoto guided the shaky blonde into an empty alley, away from prying eyes, trying to assess the situation. Katsuki looked lost, his eyes wide yet empty. Shoto understood there was an internal battle raging within him, one where he was trying to discern reality from illusion. Suddenly, Katsuki's attention was drawn to a familiar voice. By sheer luck, he spotted his best friend across the street, preparing to enter a coffee shop. Shoto reassured Katsuki that he would be right back and instructed him to stay put. He dashed across the street, rain soaking him as he reached Izuku before he could fully enter the shop. Izuku, surprised to see Shoto drenched, urged him to come inside to escape the rain. Shoto shook his head, explaining that he was dealing with a situation nearby and needed Izuku's help. He fabricated a story about a frightened child, knowing it would resonate with Izuku. Izuku's brow furrowed with concern for the child out in the storm. Shoto confirmed the child's fear and insisted that Izuku was best suited to handle it. He offered to take over Izuku's patrol with Dash while Izuku addressed the issue. Ethan, eager to help, suggested he accompany Izuku. However, Shoto's demeanor shifted, his eyes turning cold as he firmly stated that too many people would only worsen the situation. He believed Midoriya's gentle approach was necessary, and he would patrol with Ethan until the matter was resolved. Izuku nodded, agreeing to go immediately and asking for directions. Shoto quickly provided the coordinates, but just before Izuku activated his quirk, Shoto leaned in and whispered urgently about Katsuki's condition. Without wasting a moment, Izuku raced toward the alley, his heart pounding. Upon arriving, he was met with a heart-wrenching sight. Katsuki was crouched against the wall, hands over his ears, head down. His soaked hero suit clung to him, and he trembled visibly. Izuku approached slowly, his instinct urging him to run to his friend. He spoke softly, hoping his words would reach Katsuki amidst the rain and the turmoil within his mind. "It's Deku. Can you hear me? I'm here with you, you aren't alone." He doesn't get a response, only watches as Katsuki begins to rock back and forth, eyes closed, hands clamped over his ears. Izuku kneels in the wet alley, tears mingling with the rainwater on his fair cheeks. He reaches out slowly with a trembling hand. "Kacchan, please open your eyes. It's okay, I promise. You aren't alone. I don't know what you're seeing, but it's not real. Kacchan, please open your eyes and see me. See that this is just a storm." As soon as Izuku's hand touches Katsuki's arm with a firm grip, crimson eyes snap open, and sharp reflexes push the green-haired boy back, knocking him off his knees. Katsuki is wide-eyed with fear, breathing, his heart racing. He's still trapped in the images in his mind. A soft voice breaks through the chaos. "Kacchan, look at me. Really look at me. It's Deku, you're on patrol. This is just a storm. I'm with you, you're safe. Everything is okay. Kacchan, focus on my voice and look at me." Slowly, a cloudy mind begins to clear. A voice he would recognize anywhere pulls him back to reality. He blinks away the rain, seeing green eyes filled with concern. Reality starts to take hold as he focuses on the soaked hero sitting in a puddle in the pouring rain. "Deku." Izuku nods, a small sense of relief washing over him. "Yes, Kacchan. It's me. Are you okay? Do you need me to do anything for you?" Katsuki feels a rush of relief mixed with embarrassment. He stands slowly, taking a step toward Izuku, looking down at him. The green-haired boy is grateful that the rain masks his tears. A large hand reaches down, and Izuku takes it, feeling the strong grip pull him to his feet. Crimson and emerald eyes lock onto each other as Izuku stands, his hands still held in Katsuki's. There are no words yet, just the heavy rain and distant thunder of a storm moving away, while another kind of storm brews in the two heroes' chests. Katsuki isn't sure what to say or how to express it. He wants to thank Izuku and run from him, both feelings battling within him. He fights to stand his ground, even though his legs feel unstable. Rain and tears mix on his sharp features, and he curses himself for it. Izuku is close enough to smell Katsuki's soap and the traces of his quirk, causing his heart to race. Both of them remain still, locked in a trance, as if the ground might swallow them if they step away from each other. Izuku gazes up at him, studying the sharp crimson eyes that peer from beneath a black hero mask. Those eyes seem to scream a million things that Izuku longs to hear. Just as he prepares to ask if Katsuki is okay again, Katsuki speaks 4 words. "I hate the rain." The words are whispered yet powerful. Izuku struggles to nod, knowing the weight behind them. He can almost feel them against his skin, making him tremble slightly, a sensation Katsuki notices. Yes, I know you do. You've always hated it because it cools your skin and interferes with your quirk. Katsuki remains silent at first, his crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's large emerald ones, hardly blinking. Yeah, but my skin doesn't feel so cool right now, huh? His voice is husky, seeping into Izuku's mind and swirling around. Caught up in the moment, Izuku lifts his other hand, reaching for Katsuki's scarred cheek. But Katsuki quickly turns his face away, making Izuku's heart sink. The blonde's eyes shift to the puddles beneath their hero boots, and he shakes his head. No, don't do that, Det. For so many reasons, don't do that. A sharp pain pierces both their chests, like an arrow plunging through them. Izuku lets his hand fall away, slowly retracting the other from Katsuki's grip. He takes a step back, tears on his cheeks, his voice cracking. I should have known you wouldn't let me. I don't know why I keep trying. You wouldn't even let me hug you after the war. Your heart stopped, and all I ever wanted was to hug you so I could hear it beat, to know you weren't dead like they told me you were. But you wouldn't let me. He can't stop himself. His heart spills out in the wet alley like sand slipping through his fingers. Katsuki watches the breakdown, seeing the pain and anger surface. He feels frozen, letting the words hit him like daggers, knowing he deserves this. He's unmoving until he sees Izuku get frustrated with his own emotions and his lack of response. Unmoving until he sees pain-filled green eyes turn away from him, starting to walk away. In a swift motion, he reaches out, gripping Izuku's arm, spinning him back around, and pulling him hard against his chest. Strong arms envelop the smaller boy, a large hand resting on the back of wet green curls, holding him close. Izuku's eyes widen at the suddenness of the action. Then he hears it, the steady, strong beat of Katsuki's heart against the rain, against his tears, against a solid chest. He breaks into a sob, throwing his arms around the blonde, clinging to his wet hero suit, listening to the sound he has longed to hear for 2 years. Katsuki holds him there in the wet alley, rain pouring down in buckets over them both. He doesn't dare move, wouldn't dare try. Instead, a tear slides from his eye, falling into his soaked green locks. Izuku listens intently to the rhythmic thumping that he doesn't realize is calling his name. He closes his eyes, cold from the rain but warmed by the arms that have the power to both heal and break him. He's completely lost, and if he could, he'd stay like this forever. But reality strikes them both hard when Izuku's hero radio crackles to life with a voice Katsuki loathes. Izuku, it's Dash. You've been out there a long time. I see your location on the radar. I'm headed in your direction. Izuku quickly looks up, meeting crimson eyes that reflect both hurt and anger. He stays in Katsuki's embrace as he speaks, feeling the weight of his words. Kacchan. I'm sorry. Katsuki forces a weak smile, though it doesn't quite reach his eyes. It's all right, De. Go on. I'm not in the mood for heroics. If you don't want his dead body lying in this alley, you better go. I'll see you later. As soon as Katsuki releases him, Izuku feels a sense of loss, just as the blonde hero does but won't admit it. The greenette begins to walk away slowly, but then he hears a voice behind him in the rain. Oi, don't forget you owe me lunch this week, Deku. I'm holding you to it. I'm on nights all this week, find me. With that, he's gone, but the lingering presence of Katsuki remains on the soaked green hero suit. Izuku sits in an empty locker room after lacing up his hero shoes. His mind wanders back to a scene just 3 nights ago in a rainy alleyway, where, after 2 long years, he finally heard the sound of Katsuki's heartbeat. That sound is imprinted in his mind, a moment he will never forget. The feel of Katsuki's strong arms still lingers, effortlessly breaking and healing him. It's all his thoughts have been consumed by lately, and he doesn't mind. The sound of the locker room door opening draws his attention. His best friend appears with a slight smile. Hi, Midoriya. You hiding in here? Izuku laughs lightly, shaking his head. No, just lagging behind a bit, I guess. Honestly, I'm not even sure who I'm on patrol with tonight. Shoto sighs. walking towards him and taking a seat on the bench beside his friend as he pulls out a copy of the team-up schedule. "Well, I can help with that, but yours isn't hard to figure out." The greenette takes the paper and scans it, scrunching his face with a sigh when he sees he's on patrol with Dash all week. I don't understand this. Normally, Aizawa has us change partners all the time, and it looks like all of you are shuffled with different people, except for me." Shoto looks over at him, keeping his face expressionless. "You really don't know. You don't think it's odd that it's always you and Dash. You haven't figured out that he's probably told Aizawa to keep the two of you teamed at all times." Izuku raises a brow. "Well, I mean, I guess it's possible, but he never did it until recently." Shoto rolls his eyes. "Because Bakugo wasn't around before. He doesn't want to risk you getting paired with him, which is pretty controlling if you ask me. It's kind of a shame because you and Bakugo really do make an impressive hero team. Nothing ever got through the two of you. It's sad to waste that kind of talent." Izuku shifts his gaze down, contemplating Shoto's words. But I just don't see Aizawa agreeing to that, even if Dash did say something to him. You know how Mr. Aizawa is. He's always gone against that kind of request because he wants us to continuously learn from each other." Shoto is quiet for a moment, prompting Izuku to meet his gaze. "But you don't know what exactly Dash said to him to keep you paired either." Green eyes grow slightly wider. What do you mean?" Shoto shrugs, getting up and walking to the door. "Exactly what I said. Anyway, I'll see you later." He's gone after that, leaving Izuku to ponder what was said. The greenette pulls out the patrol roster again, looking over the names. He sees Katsuki is with Kirishima tonight and smiles slightly. He did say he'd have lunch with them this week, didn't he? A few hours later, Katsuki and a red-haired hero are walking the streets of Japan as night begins to fall. The blonde hero's mind is miles away, thinking about a rainy alleyway, a panicked breakdown that led to a green-eyed hero's own emotional turmoil, and a broken hero pulling him in to hear a heartbeat that calls out one name. It's hard for Katsuki to realize that Izuku had seen him in that vulnerable state, hard to know he had been weak in the eyes of the one he always wanted to be strong for. It makes his stomach turn, but at the same time, if it hadn't happened, maybe he wouldn't have had the chance to pull Izuku close and let him hear what he needed, the steady beat of his heart. He raises a brow slightly under his black hero mask, reflecting on the moments between them days ago. There was definitely a connection, a certain heat rising in the cold rain of a dark alley, even amidst the chaos in his mind. Suddenly, his best friend breaks his thoughts. "Hey man, let's turn around and go back this way. I feel like we missed a street back there," Kirishima says, stepping in front of him. Katsuki's eyes narrow. "The hell? They didn't miss any streets." Kirishima knew better than that. He chuckled while scratching the back of his neck, expressing his thoughts. He understood his friend's concern but felt they should backtrack. The blonde raised an eyebrow, sensing the nerves in Kirishima's tone. His gaze shifted over the redhead's shoulder, and he immediately understood why. Ahead, he spotted Boy Wonder and Izuku on patrol, but the dark-haired hero had his arm around Izuku's neck, reminiscent of how Katsuki would pull Izuku close, smirking as he whispered something to make him blush and laugh. Although Izuku wasn't blushing now, the sight was enough to ignite a spark of anger within him. Kirishima sighed, acknowledging the tension. He expressed his regret for not wanting to confront the situation directly. Katsuki's eyes narrowed, filled with pain and anger. He declared that he wasn't going to hide from the dark-haired hero. In fact, he wanted him to see him. Ethan suddenly noticed the scene ahead and stepped in front of Izuku, prompting a questioning look from him. He asked Izuku to run into a convenience store to grab him a water, claiming he needed it while he planned to report an earlier incident to the agency. His smile was too large for the situation. Izuku raised an eyebrow but agreed. As soon as he entered the store, Dash turned his attention back to the approaching blonde-haired hero. Katsuki shot him a glare, but when Dash intentionally bumped shoulders with him, Katsuki halted, anger flaring within him. Dash taunted Katsuki, suggesting he should watch where he was going, implying that his scar might affect his vision. The air crackled with tension as Katsuki prepared to retaliate, but before he could react, Kirishima activated his quirk, transforming his body into stone and stepping between them to hold Katsuki back. Katsuki yelled, furious and ready to unleash his anger. Kirishima narrowed his eyes at Dash, calling him out for his low blow. Dash feigned innocence, claiming he was only concerned about Katsuki's vision. Katsuki was fuming, his quirk beginning to manifest as smoke trailed off his shoulders. He accused Dash of being the instigator. Just then, Izuku arrived, worried and confused, asking what was happening. Katsuki glared at Ethan, then turned to Izuku, suggesting he should ask his boyfriend what was going on. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise as he turned to Dash for answers. Dash continued to feign innocence, claiming it was just a misunderstanding. Kirishima scoffed, insisting that Dash knew exactly what he had said. Katsuki stepped forward, grabbing Dash's collar and warning him to watch his words. He threatened that if Dash ever ran into him like that again, he wouldn't need his quirk to retaliate. Katsuki released Dash and walked away, followed by Kirishima, who gave Izuku a sympathetic look, knowing he was unaware of the full situation. Izuku watched them leave, then turned his attention to Ethan, his expression darkening. He demanded to know what Dash had said to Katsuki. Ethan rolled his eyes, frustrated that Izuku assumed he was at fault. Izuku felt his temper rising, insisting that he had seen Katsuki's anger and Kirishima's concern, which suggested something more was going on. Ethan tried to defend himself, claiming he had only asked Katsuki about his vision and that he hadn't meant to upset him. Izuku remained skeptical, pointing out that Katsuki was sensitive about his scars and that there must be more to the story. Ethan's expression shifted to one of hurt as he questioned why Izuku would doubt him. Izuku narrowed his eyes, stating that he wouldn't take sides until he knew the truth. He noted that Katsuki was not a liar and that Kirishima's anger indicated something significant had occurred. Feeling overwhelmed, Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose, expressing his exhaustion and stress. He suggested they discuss it later and return to their shift. Ethan reached for Izuku's hand, but Izuku pulled away, indicating he wasn't in the mood. Ethan forced a smile, assuring him that he would cheer up as they moved on. It was all a misunderstanding, or so he thought. Hours later, the blonde hero sat on a rooftop, still fuming during his lunch break. His hands burned with the urge to finish what had begun on the city sidewalk not long ago. If Kirishima hadn't intervened, he would have knocked that so-called hero out cold right then and there. How dare he speak to him that way, trying to provoke him and then acting innocent in front of those green eyes. Katsuki's quirk flared up again when he heard his best friend. Kirishima urged him to calm down, acknowledging his frustration but reminding him that it had been a couple of hours. The heat radiating from Katsuki's hero suit was palpable. Katsuki shot him a glare, his anger evident. He was furious, and he knew that the other hero hadn't told Deku the truth. He couldn't understand why Kirishima had stopped him from confronting the guy. Kirishima sighed, explaining that they were on duty and that a suspension would have been unnecessary for all of them. Katsuki was too good of a hero to let that happen. The blonde scowled, expressing his frustration. He wished he could be a villain, just for a few minutes, to confront that so-called hero. He knew that only one of them would walk out of that room, and he had already faced death once before. Kirishima chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. He believed it was only a matter of time before Dash revealed his true colors in front of Deku. Katsuki rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. He hoped he wouldn't have to take matters into his own hands first. Suddenly, a shy voice interrupted them. A green-eyed hero stood there with a smile and a large bag of takeout, apologizing for intruding but reminding them that he owed them lunch. Kirishima stood up, greeting Izuku warmly. He expressed disappointment at missing their lunch date but mentioned needing to drop something off for Aizawa. He promised to catch up with Katsuki later, leaving the two of them alone for the time being. Katsuki's gaze fell on Izuku's belt, where the location transmitter was. He reached for it, offering to charge it for him. Izuku smiled sheepishly, grateful for the help. As Izuku settled down next to Katsuki, he handed over his food container, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He hoped it was okay that they were alone together. Katsuki accepted the container, his eyes lingering on Izuku's emerald ones, which still made his heart race after all this time. A grin spread across his face as he welcomed the moment. Izuku watched with nostalgia as Katsuki opened his takeout box. They had shared many lunches on rooftops like this since they became a couple. He reflected on how much he missed these moments and how no one else could compare to Katsuki. Katsuki's voice broke through Izuku's thoughts, teasing him about spacing out. Izuku laughed softly, assuring him he was fine, just lost in thought. Katsuki studied him, curious about what was on his mind. When their eyes met, Izuku smiled wistfully, expressing how nice it was to be together again after so long. Katsuki felt a deep ache in his chest at the sight of that smile. He managed a small, genuine smile in return, one that only Izuku could inspire. He remarked on how long it had been since they had shared a meal, teasing Izuku about remembering his order. Izuku's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he replied that he could never forget anything about Katsuki. The words struck Katsuki hard, leaving him momentarily breathless. He looked out over the city lights, acknowledging that their bond worked both ways. Izuku felt overwhelmed with emotion, wanting to cry from the beauty of the moment and the pain of longing. He fought back tears as Katsuki expressed surprise that he had found the time to meet him, thinking that Deku would have been held back. Izuku reassured him that he meant what he said about having lunch together and would never go back on his word. Katsuki scoffed lightly, still surprised that Deku had managed to break free from the constraints placed on him. Izuku felt his heart flutter at the realization that Katsuki kept an eye on the pair-up roster, just as he did. He scrunched his face in thought, finally understanding what everyone around him seemed to notice about that schedule. He glanced down at his takeout box and admitted that he had noticed the roster too, but he was unsure about what was really happening. Katsuki let out a bitter chuckle, disbelief evident in his tone. He pointed out that Izuku was too smart to be so oblivious. He explained that the changes were due to another person's influence, someone who didn't want Izuku paired with him because he was seen as a threat. Izuku sighed, recalling that Sho had mentioned something similar. Katsuki smirked as he took a bite of his lunch, urging Izuku to focus on eating instead of chatting. He expressed his disdain for the salad that Izuku had been offered, knowing well that his friend preferred heartier meals. He described how Izuku only enjoyed salads when they were loaded with toppings that transformed them into something entirely different. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at Katsuki's candid observations about his eating habits. The sound of his laughter was infectious, prompting Katsuki to join in. He found joy in seeing Izuku so happy, realizing that the sight of him laughing was one of the most attractive things he had ever witnessed. Katsuki acknowledged that he wouldn't want to change Izuku because his quirks were part of what made him unique. When someone truly cared for another, they accepted them as they were, flaws and all. Izuku's heart swelled at Katsuki's words, feeling a warmth spread within him. Katsuki, feeling a blush creeping to his cheeks, tried to downplay his earlier statement by mentioning how he had sneakily added extra vegetables to the sauces he made for Izuku. Izuku was surprised and playfully accused Katsuki of cheating. Katsuki chuckled, confident that his strategy had worked every time without Izuku noticing. Their laughter filled the air, creating a warm and familiar atmosphere between them. However, a question weighed heavily on Izuku's mind, one he hesitated to voice but felt compelled to ask. He inquired about how Katsuki was doing after the recent storm on patrol and whether he was sleeping well. Katsuki cringed at the question, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. He avoided meeting Izuku's gaze, not wanting to reveal his struggles. He shrugged and reassured Izuku that he was all right, though he admitted that some days and nights were challenging. He added that things were better than they had been. Izuku felt a lump in his throat, realizing that if this was better, then the past must have been incredibly difficult. The thought of Katsuki enduring it all alone caused a wave of heartache to wash over him. Katsuki quickly changed the subject, turning the focus back to Izuku's well-being, noting how tired he had looked lately. Izuku sheepishly shrugged and claimed he was fine, attributing his exhaustion to working too much. He tried to smile at Katsuki, but the expression felt forced. Katsuki studied Izuku's face, his serious demeanor revealing his concern. He recognized the smile as insincere, and his frustration grew. He insisted that Izuku couldn't fool him, emphasizing that he knew him better than anyone else. He demanded to know the truth behind the facade. Izuku's heart raced as he realized Katsuki was right. He nodded, allowing a smile to break through that held traces of sadness. He confessed that he hadn't slept well in 2 years, constantly worrying about Katsuki's well-being. He had thrown himself into hero work, picking up shifts to distract himself from the emptiness he felt in Katsuki's absence. He admitted that he had grown accustomed to sleepless nights and that he too had been plagued by nightmares. As Katsuki listened to Izuku's heartfelt confession, he felt his own heart ache, torn by the weight of Izuku's words. Teary green eyes met hurt-filled crimson. The memories flooded back, the day he was told his friend was dead. He could still picture the scene, seeing him lying on the ground, bloodied and broken, while Shigaraki laughed and taunted him about taking his friend away. Overwhelmed by pain and horror, all his quirks felt like white-hot embers against his skin. He had wanted to avenge him, to confront Shigaraki, but part of him wished for the end as well, not wanting to live in a world without his friend. Even after learning that Edgeshot and Best Jeanist had saved him, the haunting image of that moment lingered. After the war, his friend had become so defensive and guarded, refusing to let him close. He knew he was alive, but he desperately needed to hear his heartbeat and feel his warmth again. He couldn't finish his thoughts as waves of pain he had carried for 2 years broke through, manifesting in tears that shook him with every heart-wrenching sob. The guilt he carried made Crimson eyes well with tears as he pulled the broken hero into his arms, resting his head against his chest to hear the steady beat of a heart that felt fragile. Katsuki mumbled through his tears, running a large hand through green locks. Izuku clung to him, fingers tightly gripping the fabric of Katsuki's hero suit, melting into his strong, warm embrace. He cried, releasing the pain he had held inside as he listened to the sound he longed for. Katsuki began to rock him slowly, surprised by his own softness. He acknowledged the pain they both felt, expressing his regret for not seeing Izuku's suffering while he was wrapped up in his own. He wished he could take back the past but reassured Izuku that he was alive and back, still a little broken but getting stronger. He urged Izuku to rest easy, knowing he was okay, even if things felt off between them. Katsuki paused, prompting Izuku to look up at him, his teary eyes searching for answers. Katsuki took a deep breath, a slow smirk forming as he wiped away Izuku's fallen tears. He declared that he would do everything he could to change their situation, acknowledging that he was a threat, but also the greatest challenge Izuku would ever face. Emerald eyes quickly scanned the new patrol roster hanging in the Hero Lounge break room. If he were honest, he would admit he was silently hoping to be paired with Katsuki, but his hopes were dashed when he saw he was assigned to patrol with Dash again. Disappointment and irritation flickered in his green eyes. It wasn't just that he wasn't with Katsuki, he missed working with his friends and other heroes. A voice interrupted his thoughts, calling out to him. Izuku turned to see the bright yellow eyes of Kaminari, who greeted him with enthusiasm. They exchanged pleasantries, and Kaminari expressed how much he missed their time together. Izuku smiled and hugged his dramatic friend, acknowledging that he needed to reconnect with everyone. Kaminari complimented Izuku, noting how much better he looked and how he seemed more rested and genuinely happy. Izuku chuckled, thinking of the moments he had shared with Katsuki recently, especially the night they had talked on a rooftop, where he finally voiced his worries and found comfort in Katsuki's strong arms. Kaminari's gaze shifted to the schedule on the wall, and he noted that he was paired with Katsuki that night, mentioning how Katsuki would prefer to be with Izuku, especially given the significance of the day. Frustration and sadness flickered in Izuku's eyes as he acknowledged the truth in Kaminari's words. He decided to try and find Katsuki during lunch and asked Kaminari to text him their location during their break. Kaminari grinned and assured Izuku he would. Izuku smiled brightly, feeling hopeful as he recalled his earlier attempt to find Katsuki, only to learn that he had started his shift early. Since he had just moved into his new place, he wanted to pick up some extra hours to cover his security deposit and other expenses. The green-eyed hero smiled softly, acknowledging his friend's responsible nature. Kaminari noticed the wistful look in Izuku's eyes, sensing the lingering emotions between them. He sighed, giving Izuku a reassuring pat on the back, expressing his happiness to see him. He reminded Izuku to hang out with them soon and promised to let him know when lunch was, urging him to be careful out there. After their goodbye, Izuku's gaze returned to the schedule on the wall, which he found confusing. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his hero gloves and headed out of the break room toward the offices. Deep blue eyes lifted from a desk as the door opened. All Might's face lit up at the sight of his favorite green-eyed hero standing sheepishly in the doorway. He welcomed Izuku warmly, asking what he could do for him. Izuku returned the greeting, stepping inside and expressing his happiness to see All Might. He inquired if Mr. Aizawa was around. All Might shook his head, informing him that Aizawa had just left for a meeting but would return later. He offered to help with anything else. Izuku felt a twinge of disappointment, wanting to catch Aizawa before his shift. However, he gave All Might a reassuring smile, not wanting to worry him. He explained that he simply wanted to ask Aizawa a question about the roster and confirmed that Aizawa was still in charge of it. All Might raised an eyebrow, walking closer to Izuku, who he considered more like a son. He asked if there was a problem. Izuku hesitated, trusting All Might but wanting to discuss this matter with Aizawa directly. He smiled and shook his head, assuring All Might that everything was fine and that he would try to catch Aizawa another time. All Might studied Izuku, noticing something brewing in his green eyes. Just then, Dash appeared in the doorway, looking at Izuku with a mix of urgency and concern. He called out to Izuku, reminding him that they needed to head out for patrol and suggesting he shouldn't bother All Might right now. Before Izuku could respond, All Might interjected, placing a strong hand on Izuku's shoulder. He assured Dash that Izuku was never a bother and was always welcome to speak with him. All Might expressed his irritation at the implication that Izuku was a nuisance, making it clear that he preferred not to put other heroes in their place. Dash quickly backtracked, forcing a smile and apologizing, claiming he meant no offense and was simply concerned about their timing. All Might nodded, patting Izuku on the shoulder and wishing him a good shift. Izuku smiled back but shot Dash an angry look. Once outside, he turned to his boyfriend, expressing his frustration over Dash's comments. He felt embarrassed and insisted that he didn't need permission to talk to All Might or anyone else. Dash sighed, explaining that he didn't mean to upset Izuku. He had just been worried about their timing since Izuku had left the locker room without informing him. Izuku's anger flared, and he reiterated that he didn't need Dash's permission for anything, questioning Dash's recent behavior. Dash feigned shock, insisting he was only looking out for Izuku and that being late would reflect poorly on him. He suggested they avoid fighting, promising to take Izuku to an all-you-can-eat sushi place the next day. Izuku frowned, trying to pull his hand away like a grumpy child. He grumbled about not liking sushi, while Dash argued that it was healthier than the fried pork he usually chose. Izuku continued to resist, insisting on his preference for katsudon and expressing his dislike for raw fish. Dash's grip tightened, and frustration flashed in his eyes as he urged Izuku to stop being difficult and reminded him they were running late. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise at Dash's sudden intensity. Dash ran a hand through his dark hair, apologizing for his tone and claiming he was just tired and trying to watch out for Izuku's diet. He leaned in, asking for a kiss before they left. Izuku remained still, not reciprocating the kiss after their earlier exchange. Dash pulled back, shaking his head in amusement at Izuku's stubbornness. Despite the tension, Izuku found himself too busy during his night shift to dwell on the earlier encounter. He fought off several villains intent on causing trouble for citizens, mostly minor issues that kept him on the go. Now, feeling tired, he knelt in front of a convenience store, chugging water during a brief break. He noticed 3 messages from Denki, detailing where he and Katsuki had stopped for lunch. It was hours ago, and he had missed every chance. Now, as midnight approached, a sense of panic gripped him. There was something he needed to do before the witching hour struck. He dashed back inside the store, quickly grabbing an item from the display case and paying hurriedly before sprinting out the door. The green-eyed hero made a swift call to a yellow-eyed ally, who thankfully answered. After receiving the information he needed, his quirk ignited, sending a vibrant green light dancing across the skyline. Time was short, only minutes remained, and he was determined to reach his target before the clock ran out. He was a mess, sweat and dirt smeared across his face, his hero suit stained, and a noticeable cut marred his forehead from a recent encounter with a villain. He and Dash had been separated when Dash had to SRT the police while they took in a prisoner, which was fine with him, to be honest. Emerald eyes flicked to a large clock hanging on the side of a building, reading 11. He pushed his quirk further, making the green glow brightly against the spring sky. On top of a tower on the far side of town, a blonde hero was growing increasingly frustrated with his yellow-eyed companion, who seemed to be taking his time leaving the area after they had checked the perimeter. The blonde's crimson eyes narrowed as he yanked his hero mask up, pushing back his sweaty blonde spikes. He was impatient, urging his partner to hurry along. Denki, however, continued to walk in circles, trying to buy time. He claimed he just wanted to check something quickly, but the blonde was having none of it. Suddenly, a green-eyed hero landed with a heavy thud nearby, his quirk still blazing. Denki grinned and hugged the newcomer tightly, revealing that he had been stalling for this moment. Izuku pulled off his mask, breathing with exhaustion, but his tired smile widened as he pulled a strawberry cupcake from the bag in his hand. He glanced at the clock, 11:59 p.m. He had made it just in time. He wished his friend a happy birthday, and the blonde's eyes widened, a hint of moisture glistening in them as his heart raced. He removed his hero gloves, his gaze fixed on the dirt-covered freckled face that he found appealing. His large fingers reached for the treat held out in a tattered white hero glove. Crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's green ones, questioning why the blonde had yet to respond. Before Izuku could speak, Katsuki pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close. He expressed how he had received countless birthday wishes that day, but none compared to this one. Izuku had never missed his birthday, not even when he was away, and he couldn't imagine what it would be like without that consistent acknowledgement. Izuku smiled into Katsuki's shoulder, tears spilling from his green eyes as he reaffirmed that he would never miss it. Katsuki pulled back, gently wiping away a fallen tear with his fingertip. He noted the cut on Izuku's forehead, his expression shifting to one of concern. He scolded Izuku for not having it cleaned and bandaged yet and rummaged through his pocket for a band-aid, grabbing his water bottle as well. He instructed Izuku to close his eyes for a moment. The cool water poured over the cut, soothing both the injury and his overheated skin. Katsuki wiped it dry with a napkin from the store bag before carefully placing a band-aid over the area. Izuku watched every move, his heart aching with gratitude for the gentle care from someone so strong. Katsuki's gaze met his, and without a word, he smirked before leaning in to place a soft kiss over the band-aid. The unexpected action took Izuku's breath away, feeling the warmth linger for a moment. Katsuki whispered that he needed to go home and rest, acknowledging how exhausted he looked. Finally pulling away, Katsuki took a large bite of the cupcake, smirking at Izuku before starting to walk away. He remarked that he had never liked sweet things, but both the cupcakes and Izuku were exceptions. The past few weeks of being a hero had been challenging, with little time to recover. Izuku was tired, trying to manage more sleep after a conversation with Katsuki about the importance of rest. He had noticed that Katsuki also looked worn out, and he wondered if it was due to the job or the nightmares that haunted the explosive hero on some nights. There hadn't been much time to talk, just brief exchanges of glances and nods. He closed his green eyes for a moment, sliding down the wall to rest before heading out on his shift. Another reason for his fatigue was Ethan, who insisted on spending time together even when Izuku was too tired. There were also nights when Dash showed up to sleep over, waking Izuku from his slumber with the ringing of his bell. No matter how much he explained that he needed his rest, it never seemed to matter. There was always an excuse for why Ethan was pushing the issue, and Izuku had been too worn out to argue about it. Suddenly, he felt a nudge on his foot and looked up to see the tired, dark eyes of the pro-hero he now worked under. Mr. Aizawa greeted him, noting that it was a good idea to rest, especially with how restless things had been outside. He asked if something was keeping Izuku awake. Aizawa noticed a troubling look in Izuku's green eyes, something twisting within him. Abruptly, Izuku stood up, prompting Aizawa to raise an eyebrow in question. He quickly mentioned that he wanted to ask something. Aizawa leaned back against the wall, hands in his pockets, and encouraged him to speak freely. Izuku hesitated, struggling to articulate his thoughts. He expressed that he had noticed he was only paired with 𝐻𝐿 for patrols lately. While he thought 𝐻𝐿 was a good hero, he missed working with his friends and learning from other heroes. He wondered if there was a reason for this or if he had done something wrong. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall, confusion and concern evident in his dark eyes. He revealed that the pairing had been made at Izuku's request. Izuku's eyes widened in disbelief. He insisted he never made such a request and questioned Aizawa about it. Aizawa scrolled through his messages, finding one that he turned to show Izuku. The message was a request to only be paired with 𝐻𝐿 for patrols due to discomfort around Katsuki. Izuku's heart raced as he realized the message was indeed from his number, but he had not written it. He protested, explaining that he would never make such a request and that he was happy Katsuki was back. Aizawa, aware of the oddity of the situation, had previously spoken to 𝐻𝐿 about the message. 𝐻𝐿 had claimed that Izuku was struggling with Katsuki's return and that they had decided it was best for Izuku to only work with 𝐻𝐿 for a while. Izuku felt sick, his heart sinking. He was angry and confused, desperate to understand how this had happened. Tears formed in his eyes as he confirmed to Aizawa that he had nothing to do with the decision or the text. Aizawa clenched his jaw, feeling anger rise within him. He explained that 𝐻𝐿's actions were problematic. 𝐻𝐿 had sent the text, pretending to be the protective boyfriend because he viewed Katsuki as a threat. Aizawa warned that such manipulation could backfire, pushing Izuku closer to Katsuki instead of keeping him away. Izuku's anger intensified as he walked, realizing that the message Aizawa had shown him had been erased from his log. It was clear that 𝐻𝐿 had gone to great lengths to control the situation. 𝐻𝐿 wouldn't want the evidence of his actions left behind for those green eyes to see. Izuku sighed as he looked up at the night sky while walking down the sidewalk. This situation needed to be addressed as soon as possible, preferably when he wasn't worn out and exhausted, which was how he had been feeling lately. Suddenly, he heard footsteps racing towards him from behind, prompting him to turn around swiftly. His green eyes narrowed at the sight of his so-called boyfriend, and before 𝐻𝐿 could utter a word, Izuku turned away, anger evident in his tone. He expressed his frustration, stating that 𝐻𝐿 had some nerve to approach him after what he had done. Izuku made it clear that he had nothing to say and needed to be on his way, promising to discuss things after he had some rest. 𝐻𝐿's pleas fell on deaf ears as he grabbed Izuku by the wrist, urging him to wait and apologize, wanting to talk about the situation. Izuku spun around, his anger flaring. He couldn't believe 𝐻𝐿 had gone behind his back, broken into his phone, and pretended to be him. He demanded to know what 𝐻𝐿 was thinking when he sent a message to Aizawa, expressing disbelief that he thought Izuku wouldn't find out. Izuku insisted that he was not uncomfortable with Kacchan being back. It was 𝐻𝐿 who felt that way. 𝐻𝐿's eyes flashed with anger as he tightened his grip on Izuku. He admitted that he was uncomfortable, unable to understand how Izuku could still have feelings for Kacchan. He reminded Izuku of who had been there for him when Kacchan left. With each word, his grip tightened, but Izuku hardly felt it due to his own rising anger. Izuku reminded 𝐻𝐿 that he had warned him about his feelings for Kacchan, stating that he would always care for him. 𝐻𝐿's rage ignited, and he yanked Izuku towards him with such force that it almost knocked him off his feet, causing a jolt of pain to radiate through Izuku's arm. He warned Izuku not to speak such foolishness in public. As the tension escalated, a voice interrupted them, asking if everything was all right. Both heroes turned to see Todoroki standing nearby, steam rising from his left side, a clear indication of his anger. Dash immediately released Izuku and attempted to fix his hero uniform, offering a frustrated smile to Todoroki. He downplayed the situation, claiming it was just a lover's disagreement that would be resolved later. Todoroki remained expressionless, but his eyes held a warning. He clarified that he was speaking to Midoriya, not Dash, and his cold tone made it clear he was serious. Izuku quickly stepped forward, assuring Todoroki that everything was fine and that he just needed some space. He mentioned he was on his way home but had to drop off something at Kacchan's for Mr. Aizawa. Spoke next, promising to call Izuku later, but Izuku firmly stated that he needed space and that 𝐻𝐿 should respect that. With that he walked away, leaving 𝐻𝐿 and Todoroki behind. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 met Ethan's gaze with a cold stare, warning him that he didn't know the full story but had seen enough to act if necessary. He hinted that there was someone else who could be even more intimidating than him. Ethan offered a tight smile as he turned to leave, wishing Todoroki a good night. Todoroki responded with a simple correction of his name, stating it was Todoroki, not just Shoto. Izuku stumbled down the street, feeling dazed. The night had been overwhelming, and he struggled to process everything. Ethan's reaction was unexpected, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't know him as well as he thought. Before he could dwell on this further, he found himself in front of Katsuki's building. A mix of excitement and nerves surged within him. He had never been here before, and the blonde didn't know he was coming, causing a slight hesitation. However, he reminded himself that he was on official business as he exited the elevator on the 5th floor. Glancing down at the note Aizawa had written with Katsuki's apartment number, he stood in front of the door, hand raised and ready to knock, his stomach fluttering with nerves. Taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly and waited impatiently. He heard a rough voice over the music playing inside, telling him to wait a moment. Izuku chuckled lightly at the familiar irritation in Katsuki's voice when interrupted. The door swung open to reveal the blonde, dressed in a black tank top and sweats, his hands taped, sweat glistening on his arms. Izuku's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Katsuki, who was obviously in the middle of a workout, a sight that always made Izuku's heart race. Katsuki looked equally surprised to see Izuku at his door. He wiped sweat from his forehead, his breath heavy as he greeted him. Izuku smiled, a blush creeping onto his cheeks from the way he had been staring. He explained that Mr. Aizawa had some documents he needed Katsuki to sign and fax back that night. Izuku held out the folder, indicating its importance to Katsuki. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, unsure of what could be so significant. As he opened the folder and began to scan the forms, a soft voice in the hallway caught his attention, drawing his gaze back to Izuku's wide green eyes. Izuku mentioned that he would be leaving, apologizing for the unannounced visit and wishing Katsuki a good night. Katsuki smirked, reaching out to pull Izuku back by the ears of his hero suit helmet. He playfully questioned where Izuku thought he was going so soon. Izuku explained that he felt bad for interrupting, thinking Katsuki was busy. Katsuki rolled his eyes, insisting that Izuku hadn't interrupted anything and encouraged him to come inside for a drink, teasingly suggesting that he might be worried about where Izuku was since they often patrolled together. Katsuki noticed a change in Izuku's expression, sensing that something he said had struck a nerve. Izuku appeared a bit distant and disheveled, which concerned Katsuki. Clearing his throat, he invited Izuku in, mentioning that he hadn't even seen his new place yet and jokingly suggested that he might be offended for not receiving a housewarming gift. Izuku laughed lightly, scratching the back of his neck sheepishly, and agreed to come inside. As he entered, he took in the living room, which still had several unpacked boxes. The space was sparsely furnished with a dark gray sofa, a love seat, a black oversized chair, and a large TV stand with a flat screen. A punching bag hung in the corner, and the walls were still bare. Katsuki walked into the kitchen, explaining that things were still a bit of a mess due to his busy schedule. Izuku nodded, complimenting the place and noting that it was coming along nicely. Katsuki took a drink from his water bottle, his thoughts drifting to how he and Izuku had once envisioned living together after becoming a couple. The war had changed everything, and he wondered if they could still have that dream. Noticing Izuku's hero suit was unusually clean for someone who had just finished a shift, Katsuki asked if he had worked that day. Izuku explained that he had been told to take the night off by Mr. Aizawa after being found asleep in the hallway at the agency. Katsuki studied him, skeptical of Aizawa's leniency, especially since Izuku seemed reluctant to meet his gaze. Katsuki offered Izuku a drink, suggesting water or beer since he wasn't working. Izuku chose water, expressing concern about being a bother. Katsuki dismissed the notion, knowing that Izuku could never be a bother to him. As Katsuki retrieved a water bottle from the fridge, Izuku reminded him to get the documents signed and returned to Aizawa promptly. Katsuki took the folder again, his fingers brushing over the papers. He realized he had already signed these documents and handed them to Aizawa after the incidents occurred. A realization dawned on him. Aizawa had sent Izuku to him with a purpose, likely a mission that Katsuki needed to address more than Izuku realized. A smirk crossed his face as he appreciated the cleverness of his former teacher, who had orchestrated this without Izuku's knowledge. Izuku settled onto Katsuki's sofa, having removed his hero boots, helmet, and gloves, leaving him in just his stirrup hero breathes, socks, and shirt. Katsuki noticed that Izuku seemed a bit uncomfortable in his gear and offered to lend him some sweats. Izuku smiled with a shrug and a light blush, feeling a bit uncomfortable. He reassured Katsuki that it was okay and that he probably shouldn't stay long anyway. Katsuki frowned at those words, clearly not pleased. He moved to a box in his living room and rummaged through it for a few minutes before tossing Izuku a pair of white sweatpants and a black t-shirt. Katsuki insisted that Izuku change, directing him to the bathroom down the hall. Izuku looked at the clothes with a sheepish smile before standing up and heading to the bathroom. He called back to Katsuki, promising to be right out. As Izuku slipped on the oversized t-shirt, he was reminded of the times he used to wear Katsuki's clothes. The familiar scent brought back memories of when they would dig through Katsuki's closet for something comfortable to wear to bed. It was something he missed, and even though he still had a few of Katsuki's garments, nothing compared to the scent that had faded over time. He felt a flutter of nervousness as he prepared to leave the bathroom, recalling how long it had been since they had spent time together like this. A voice broke his thoughts, teasing him about taking too long. Izuku rolled his eyes with a laugh as he stepped out to find Katsuki smirking in the living room. Katsuki mentioned that he had ordered dinner, which surprised Izuku. Katsuki explained that he figured Izuku hadn't eaten since he was supposed to be at work, and he noticed how tired Izuku looked. Izuku blushed at the thoughtfulness, realizing that Katsuki had always understood him in ways others did not. He protested that he could have found something to eat at home, but Katsuki smirked, listing the sparse contents of Izuku's fridge. Izuku stared at him, raising an eyebrow in disbelief, feeling as if Katsuki had been to his apartment. He crossed his arms and insisted that there was an apple in the fridge too. Katsuki laughed, teasing Izuku about the half-eaten apple. Izuku bit his lip, trying to suppress his laughter, and plopped down on the couch, rolling his eyes. Katsuki paused, his laughter fading as he locked eyes with Izuku, lifting his beer bottle and speaking with a slow smile. He declared that he knew Izuku well, and those words sent a rush of warmth through Izuku. Feeling shy, Izuku looked down, a gentle smile on his face, agreeing that it was true. Katsuki handed him a beer, encouraging him to relax since he had the next day off. Izuku accepted the bottle with a slight smile, noting that Katsuki looked tired too. Katsuki shrugged, mentioning the challenges at work and his own struggles with nightmares, then asked about Izuku's restlessness. Izuku hesitated, admitting he was just restless, but Katsuki pressed further, suggesting that Izuku's boyfriend might be the cause of his unease. Izuku's eyes dropped, confirming Katsuki's suspicion without saying a word. Just as he seemed ready to respond, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of their food. Katsuki cursed under his breath as he answered the door, quickly returning with the takeout. Izuku thanked him and dug into the food, expressing his enjoyment. Katsuki suggested that Izuku should come over one night for a home-cooked meal if he could manage to escape his boyfriend for a while. Just then, Izuku's phone rang, and he frowned as he rejected the call. Katsuki raised an eyebrow, curious about who was calling. Izuku's nervousness grew as Katsuki pressed him about the caller, clearly annoyed. He insisted that Izuku should just answer and tell the person to leave him alone, offering to do it himself if needed. Izuku shook his head as he finally silenced his phone. He smiled, but it was forced and uneasy, and Katsuki could sense it. Katsuki thought to himself that something was clearly wrong. He cleared his throat and took another drink from his beer. He asked Izuku what was going on, insisting that he knew better than to say nothing. He had noticed something was off as soon as he saw Izuku at the door. Izuku swallowed hard, his eyes downcast. He explained that he had been curious about the pairing roster and had finally spoken to Mr. Aizawa about it. Aizawa had told him that he had kept Izuku paired with Dash because Izuku had requested it. But Izuku insisted that he had not made such a request. Finally looking in Katsuki's direction, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Katsuki's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He was incredulous, realizing that 𝐻𝐿𝐴 must have been fooled into thinking Izuku had sent a message. Izuku sighed, explaining that Dash had used his phone to send a text to 𝐻𝐿𝐴, claiming that Izuku felt uncomfortable with Katsuki being home and preferred to be with Dash for safety. Dash had deleted the message afterward, and although 𝐻𝐿𝐴 found it strange, he had been too busy to ask Izuku directly. The atmosphere shifted as the heavy smell of nitroglycerin filled the air, causing Izuku's green eyes to dart to the hero, who had abruptly stood up and started pacing, running a hand through his hair. Katsuki's anger was palpable as he expressed disbelief that Dash would go so far out of jealousy and possessiveness. He demanded to know if Izuku had confronted Dash and if he was aware that Izuku knew the truth. Izuku urged Katsuki to calm down, explaining that he hated seeing him upset. He admitted that he had told Dash how angry he was and requested some space, omitting the part about Dash's roughness as he covered the still red mark on his wrist. Katsuki felt a surge of frustration, insisting that Izuku needed to stand up to Dash and not let him get away with such behavior. Izuku shifted his gaze, tears welling in his eyes as he confessed that he felt overwhelmed and needed time to process everything without feeling guilty. Katsuki's heart sank at Izuku's words, and he sat down beside him with a heavy sigh, gently tapping his thigh. He reassured Izuku that he wasn't angry with him, just upset about Dash's actions and concerned about what else he might be capable of. After a moment of silence, Katsuki asked what had led Izuku to date Dash in the first place. Izuku sighed, leaning back on the sofa and staring at the ceiling. He admitted that it had almost happened without him realizing it. After Katsuki had left, he had felt lost and just went along with emotions. Dash had been kind and supportive, and Izuku had let him in during a vulnerable time, trying to fill the emptiness he felt. Emerald eyes met crimson as Izuku shared that only when Katsuki returned did he feel like he could breathe again. Katsuki felt a pang of guilt, realizing he was the reason Izuku had ended up with someone like Dash. He apologized, expressing remorse in ways that Izuku couldn't fully grasp. As their eyes met, a slow smile formed on Katsuki's face. He stood up, declaring that Izuku was with him now, enjoying real food and drinks, and that Dash could be forgotten. With a smirk, he turned up the stereo, letting the music fill the room. He began to sing loudly into his beer bottle, treating it like a microphone, fully immersed in the moment. Izuku watched with raised brows and a huge smile, laughter bubbling up as he enjoyed this rare side of Katsuki, his fun, silly side that he had only glimpsed before. A side that was currently showing to cheer up green eyes, and it was working like pure magic. Katsuki grinned as he walked over, pulling Izuku to his feet and catching him off guard. The blonde put a strong arm around his waist, pulling him into a dance while singing at the top of his lungs, his grin and laughter making Izuku laugh even harder. They rocked back and forth to the music, Katsuki holding a freckled cheek and leaning in to sing another verse. Izuku was caught up in the biggest smile he had worn in a long time as they danced clumsily around the living room. His sides ached from laughter, and for once, his fatigue and aching heart felt miles away as he listened to the words of a song that held meaning. Part of him wanted to laugh until he cried, while another part wanted to weep until daybreak. He decided that either way, he would do it with the blonde, who still had an arm locked tightly around him. After a makeshift concert and a few drinks, they watched a movie where they talked more than they actually watched. Eventually, Izuku fell soundly asleep on Katsuki's shoulder. Katsuki let him stay there for hours, just watching and feeling the weight on his shoulder that he had missed for a long time. He leaned down, breathing in the scent of Izuku's shampoo, while his heart ached with memories. Reluctantly, he got up, moving slowly as he laid Izuku down on a pillow and covered him up. He wouldn't wake him or tell him to go home and get some rest. No, tonight he would keep him as close as possible, knowing he was safe and with him. Maybe, just maybe, they could both get some sleep away from the nightmares and restlessness that haunted broken hearts and shattered minds. Emerald eyes began to stir awake as light from the early morning broke through the curtains in Katsuki's apartment. Izuku blinked back sleep, slowly trying to let his eyes and mind adjust to wakefulness while stretching slightly. He felt comfortable, more comfortable than he had been in months, maybe years. His eyes drifted closed again as the muscles in his body felt completely at ease. He inhaled deeply, laying there with his eyes closed. Although Katsuki had not lived in this apartment for long, his scent already filled the space with deep caramel and spice, along with waves of his body wash and cologne. It made Izuku smile subconsciously as he inhaled again, noticing that Katsuki's scent lingered on the blanket covering him. Izuku realized he had fallen asleep on the blonde's couch when he woke up to get a drink. He was startled and shot straight up from his sleepy state when it sank in that he wasn't home. He could have left, probably should have, and gone home at that moment. But when his eyes shifted across the room in the dark and he saw that Katsuki was asleep in a chair in the corner, illuminated only by moonlight, his heart ached in a way that threatened to break him into tears. He tiptoed quietly to the oversized chair where the blonde was asleep, noticing his long, muscular legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles, with his arms crossed over a built chest. His head leaned back, resting against the chair, exposing his strong jawline to the moonlight streaming through the window. The scars of battle on his face were clearly visible. Scars that held so much weight for the blonde hero, who saw them as signs of weakness or defeat, marks that made him feel less strong, less wise, less attractive. But Izuku had never seen it that way. It was the furthest thing from the truth. Katsuki was beyond strong, in more ways than just physically. He was smart, both book-wise and street-wise, and his looks could never be denied. He was gorgeous to Izuku in every way imaginable, and somehow, that scar on his face made him even more attractive. Tears brimmed in Izuku's eyes as he recalled all the times Katsuki would turn his face away whenever he thought Izuku was looking too closely. He remembered not long after the war when he reached for the blonde's face for the first time and how Katsuki recoiled from him. He had seen deep shame in those crimson eyes, shame that Katsuki desperately tried to hide behind anger. He had lashed out, telling Izuku not to touch him anymore, not to stand too close or look too hard, and to back off and give him space. Those words had cut deeply into Izuku's heart, who only wanted to love him through it but was being pushed away. As the memories played like a damaged record in Izuku's mind, rubbing against the scars on his heart, he reached for the blonde's face again while Katsuki slept peacefully in the chair. But just before his fingertips reached the forbidden scar, he slowly retracted his hand, knowing full well that Katsuki wouldn't want him to. So, he would wait, just as he had been, waiting for the day that Katsuki would finally see that this had never made him weak or less in Izuku's eyes. He would wait as long as it took. He admired the way Katsuki looked as he slept a while longer, seated on the floor with his knees pulled up and his chin resting on top of them. Katsuki appeared peaceful, a far cry from the anguished nightmares Izuku had heard him having the night he had passed by on the sidewalk. Selfishly, he hopes in silence that perhaps his presence has soothed the darkness that still plagues the hero's mind. Izuku had slipped back under the blankets on the couch after that and drifted back to sleep until now. The green-eyed hero sits up, glancing over at Katsuki, who is still asleep. He should leave now. The blonde had been kind to let him stay without waking him, but he feels like he might be imposing. After all, Katsuki is just moving in, and last night he had taken a break from unpacking to spend the evening with Izuku. He is incredibly grateful for that because, after everything that happened with Dash, he has been feeling extremely down and stressed. His mind shifts back to the situation with his so-called boyfriend, remembering how Dash had impersonated him through text to Aizawa and the way he had grabbed him, leaving behind an ugly bruise that is even darker in color today. He sighs deeply, knowing he has to take care of this situation and end it because it isn't going anywhere. Ethan is showing sides of himself that Izuku isn't fond of, crossing many lines that lead to the inevitable end of their relationship. Emerald eyes glance again at the sleeping blonde. Should he wake him before he leaves? No, Katsuki looks so calm finally, as if sleep is heavy upon him, and that's a good thing. So, Izuku decides to slip out quietly and text the blonde later. After gathering his hero suit that he changed out of the night before and folding the blanket neatly to set it back on the sofa, he puts on his shoes and heads for the door. Just as he places his hand on the silver handle and opens it slightly, it suddenly slams shut behind him. He jumps at the suddenness and glances up to see a large hand holding it closed, accompanied by a voice that is rough with sleep. "Leaving so soon, nerd?" without saying goodbye or anything. That's pretty rude if you ask me. The voice sends a warm shiver down Izuku's back. He turns around quickly, blushing deep crimson at how close Katsuki actually is, so close that he can feel his warmth. A deep part of him longs to put his arms around those broad shoulders and sink into that never-ending warmth. But Katsuki's sharp scarlet eyes demand some kind of response, and upon closer inspection, Izuku thinks those eyes actually look kind of sad. Oh, good morning, Kacchan. It's just that. You were sleeping so soundly that I didn't want to wake you, so I was going to send you a text later after I was sure you woke up. He stammers out his explanation. Katsuki crosses his arms over his chest. The text. When you were right here. I would have been upset if I woke up to that instead of you. Besides, what the hell are you rushing off for? Didn't you tell me you had the day off? Izuku blinks up at the blonde hero. Well, yes, that's right, but I thought that. I took up so much of your time last night, and you're trying to unpack and stuff, so I thought maybe I was being a nuisance. Katsuki rolls his eyes. A nuisance? As if this clueless hero before him could ever be such a thing when all the blonde longs for these days is his presence in any way he can get it. He clears his throat. If you don't want to be a nuisance, I guess you better stay and help me unpack. But first, we're going to have breakfast because I'm starving. Izuku watches him go. He should probably leave and tell Katsuki he has things to do, but he doesn't because his heart doesn't want him to. He wants to stay close, and if Katsuki wants that too, then he's okay with it. Hey, Kacchan, I can do that. The green-eyed hero sits at the breakfast counter, watching the blonde move around the kitchen with ease as he makes omelets for them both. It's a sight so familiar that it makes his heart ache. Katsuki has always been so good at everything, and cooking is no different. He is so lost in thought that he hardly realizes Katsuki has set his breakfast down in front of him. There's a smirk in those deep crimson eyes. I see some things never change and you still space out. What are you thinking about? Katsuki grins, taking a seat across the counter. Izuku laughs sheepishly. Nothing really, just remembering how much you always like to cook. Even in you had such a skill for it, he says, taking a bite of the perfect omelet. The blonde shrugs with a smirk, digging into his own food. Someone in the dorms had to know how to cook. Dunce always short-circuited things, and you set the smoke alarms off more than once. Izuku blushes as he laughs softly at the memory. Hush, I may have put my cup of noodles in the microwave for 30 minutes once, but that was just because I was up all night studying and was tired. Katsuki looks over at him, crimson eyes meeting pretty green as a slow teasing smile forms. Is that the excuse you're going with? Izuku nods with a giggle. Definitely. You don't know otherwise, Kacchan. Katsuki chuckles deeply. I know you're but came tearing up the stairs and down the hall, bursting into my room in tears, telling me we had to get out before I died. By the time we got downstairs, it was just a pile of ash in the microwave. Izuku laughs with him, remembering the night well. That's when I started making your dinner every day because it annoyed me that you waited to eat so late and almost burned the place down, Katsuki grins. Izuku nods with a wistful smile, his eyes on his plate. Yes, I recall it. Even on days I was late coming back to the dorm, there was always a plate in the fridge waiting for me. Finally, Izuku lifts his gaze to meet the crimson one looking back at him. Thank you for that, Kacchan. It might not seem like it, and perhaps he never mentioned it, but he felt grateful. Katsuki's heart skipped a beat, something he cursed himself for under his breath, as the nerd across the table effortlessly pulled reactions from him, even involuntary ones. His crimson eyes shifted to his plate as he shrugged. He acknowledged the gesture, saying it was no big deal and that he enjoyed doing it. They decided to start unpacking. A couple of hours later, several boxes had been unpacked and put away while they talked and laughed. The living room was mostly done, and as they worked, Katsuki felt a twinge of sadness. He had always imagined doing this with Izuku, but not like this. He had hoped they would do it when they moved into a place of their own, something he still selfishly wanted, no matter the cost. Katsuki's thoughts were interrupted when he noticed Izuku holding a framed picture. It was one Katsuki had taken right after they started dating, his favorite, which had always held a place on his nightstand. Suddenly feeling sheepish, Katsuki responded that of course he still had it, wondering why he wouldn't. Izuku smiled through the ache in his heart and shrugged, expressing uncertainty about whether Katsuki would want such things after their breakup. Katsuki sighed deeply, feeling the sting of those words. After a slight pause, he reassured Izuku that just because he had broken things off because he was broken didn't mean he had stopped loving him. Katsuki's attention was suddenly drawn to something on Izuku's wrist, as the sweatshirt he had lent him had pulled up. His eyes narrowed sharply. He demanded to know what the mark was. Izuku's heart sank as he quickly yanked the sleeve down, trying to brush it off as nothing more than a bruise from training, his voice shaking. Katsuki wasn't convinced and reached over, pulling the sleeve up himself. His eyes widened at the sight of the fingerprints wrapped around Izuku's wrist. The air felt charged with tension, and Katsuki's anger flared. He confronted Izuku, demanding to know if someone had done this to him. When he saw the tears forming in Izuku's eyes, he knew he had his answer. Katsuki stormed to the door, putting on his shoes as smoke began to trail off him from his anger. Izuku jumped to his feet, gripping Katsuki's arm and pleading with him to wait, asking where he was going. Katsuki's fiery gaze revealed his determination to confront the person who had hurt Izuku, insisting that he wouldn't let it go. Izuku, panic-stricken, begged Katsuki not to do anything reckless that could jeopardize his hero license. Katsuki, consumed by rage, felt the heat rising within him. He was torn, but Izuku's plea made him freeze in place. The green-eyed hero clung to him tightly, begging him to handle it and promising he would. Katsuki finally relented, agreeing to let Izuku handle it but warning him to stay away from that person. After some time, once Izuku was sure Katsuki had calmed down, he reluctantly left for his own apartment. However, Katsuki was anything but calm. Hours later, after his shift ended, he was ready to confront the situation. As soon as Ethan rounded the corner, he was grabbed by the collar from a dark alley and slammed against a brick wall. Shock and fear washed over him as he recognized the familiar hero, who was visibly furious. Katsuki confronted Ethan, accusing him of having the nerve to put his hands on Izuku. Ethan, feeling the pressure of Katsuki's grip, attempted to explain that it was a misunderstanding, claiming he had gotten too rough when reaching for Izuku. Before he could finish, Katsuki delivered a hard left hook to Ethan's jaw, causing him to wince in pain. Katsuki's anger boiled over as he warned Ethan to listen closely. He made it clear that if he ever saw a mark on Izuku again, he would not hesitate to take drastic action. He would be watching Ethan closely, ready to unleash his fury if necessary. Ethan sat alone in his apartment days later, nursing an ice pack on his face, still feeling the ache from Katsuki's punch. He hated to admit it, but Katsuki was strong, even without his quirk, and that realization was frustrating. More than just aggravating, it was infuriating, and that was exactly how Ethan felt at that moment. He had been seething inside ever since Katsuki confronted him outside of work, making threats and delivering a punch before Ethan could react, all because of a minor bruise he had left on Izuku during a heated exchange. His brows knitted with anger as he reflected on the situation. It wasn't as if he had struck the green-eyed hero, he had merely held Izuku's wrist too tightly in the heat of the moment. There was no need for Katsuki to overreact as he did. A twist of annoyance crossed Ethan's face as he considered how that troublesome blonde always seemed to blow things out of proportion regarding him and his relationship, which had been rocky ever since Katsuki returned. Deep down, Ethan had always known that Izuku still loved Katsuki. It was something the Greenette had admitted to him early on. He recalled vividly when Izuku had warned him that no one would ever truly have his heart, that it would always belong to one person. And Ethan knew exactly who that was. Katsuki existed in Izuku's mind like an untouchable god, an unstoppable force that could not be challenged. Izuku placed Katsuki on a pedestal that no one could knock him down from. In Izuku Midoriya's eyes, Katsuki Bakugo was perfection incarnate, something that had always irked Ethan to his core. The very reason Ethan had pursued Izuku in the first place was that he saw it as a challenge. He wanted to see if it was possible to knock the blonde hero off that high pedestal. He had assumed it would be easy, considering how Katsuki had ended things with Izuku, believing that since Izuku was heartbroken, it would be simple to alter the image the 𝐻𝐿𝐴 had of the great explosion god. However, he had misjudged just how deeply Izuku's feelings ran for those crimson eyes and blonde spikes. Ethan had made sure to be the nice guy, inserting himself into Izuku's life while keeping his friends at a distance. He pretended to be the perfect listener, the perfect confidant, and the perfect neighbor, all with fake charm and outstanding character. He ignored Izuku's claims that he didn't want a relationship, and since Izuku was gentle-hearted, he hardly noticed when Ethan wore him down to the point that he had given up protesting against one. Yes, Ethan had managed to slip through the cracks undetected, slowly sealing the deal on a relationship he had no real intentions of maintaining for long. However, being with Japan's #1 hero had its perks. He gained more attention and admiration, plus Izuku was always invited to top events for free. Everything from exclusive hero parties to hero exhibits and openings, right down to ribbon-cutting ceremonies for 5-star restaurants and hotels. Because of these advantages, he pushed harder, even when the 𝐻𝐿𝐴 seemed to resist. Ethan rolled his eyes as he thought about it all. Those perks were wasted on someone like Izuku, who never cared to participate in any of those events unless they involved All Might or Aizawa or had something to do with the close-knit group of friends he cherished. Izuku had simple tastes, which was highly irritating to Ethan. He had come to the conclusion that Izuku was actually quite boring, and he probably would have moved on by now if not for that blonde nuisance returning to town. Once again, he saw it as the ultimate challenge to keep his relationship with Izuku intact, to prove to everyone that he was the perfect boyfriend and that Katsuki was the one who had broken the poor 𝐻𝐿𝐴's heart, while he was the one who mended it. But things were not going as he had hoped or planned. Katsuki seemed to be winning Izuku back just by being present, and that was downright infuriating. To make matters worse, not only were Izuku's friends but also heroes like Aizawa and even All Might somehow trying to match the two back up, which was even more troublesome and insulting to him. His eyes narrowed as he continued to let these thoughts twist in his mind. What was so great about that blonde nuisance anyway? He was bad-tempered, foul-mouthed, and seemed to lack any manners whatsoever. It was also sickening how he seemed to coddle Izuku, allowing him to indulge in unhealthy food and getting upset over a minor bruise on his wrist when Izuku faced far worse injuries in villain fights regularly. Ethan gritted his teeth in frustration as he pulled on a hooded sweatshirt and headed out the door to the hero agency since a meeting had been called for all heroes. As he walked, he continued to stew in his thoughts. It was also annoying to see the way Izuku looked at Katsuki, with admiration shining in his green eyes every time he glanced in the blonde's direction. It was unmistakable, and that was maddening. Ethan's plan had always been to make Izuku fall for him, not just like him, but that hadn't worked out at all. These days, he wasn't even sure if the green-eyed hero liked him, especially with Katsuki constantly stepping in to highlight his faults and position himself as the hero. It was all so irritating that Ethan felt he might start to break out in hives. Suddenly, he found himself in front of the hero agency, having been so lost in thought that he hadn't realized how quickly he had arrived. He pulled the hood up on his white sweatshirt, trying to conceal the dark bruise on his jawline caused by an explosive encounter. Slightly late and annoyed that he had even been called in for a meeting on his day off, he decided to stay in the back, out of most people's view, as he slipped into the meeting room mostly unnoticed. Mostly, but a smirking blonde hero did notice him. As Katsuki walked by to take a seat near the front, he couldn't help but nudge the redhead Ethan was paired with on patrol that day. Kirishima couldn't help but snicker at the comment while Ethan glared at the blonde who leaned in to whisper something. The blonde remarked on the bruise, suggesting Ethan should be more careful out there, before walking away with a satisfied grin that only fueled Ethan's frustration. Suddenly, Ethan spotted Izuku entering through the front entrance. Their eyes met, and he noticed Katsuki's large smile from across the room. The blonde smirked and waved, which only intensified Ethan's irritation. Izuku was seated next to 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and Shoto, laughing softly with them. Ethan thought it must be nice, especially since Izuku had avoided him since Aizawa had revealed the text. Aizawa soon appeared at the front of the room, glasses perched on his nose and clipboard in hand. The moment he glanced up, the room fell silent. He nodded at the heroes and began to speak. He thanked everyone for coming in on their day off or cutting into their patrols or lunches, promising to make the announcement brief. He explained that they needed to 𝐬𝐶 things up a bit, build tighter bonds, and work more closely together. To achieve this, everyone would be going on a week-long training camp, similar to what some of them had experienced as students at UA. Izuku and Katsuki exchanged excited looks, recalling the fun they had during those training camps, workouts, drills, training exercises, and the enjoyable downtime spent around campfires and cookouts. Ethan watched their exchange, his discontent growing. Unbeknownst to him, dark eyes were observing from the back of the room. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 continued, mentioning bunkhouse names and who would be sharing cabins. He paused, his gaze landing on a white-hooded figure. Ethan felt a surge of anger as 𝐻𝐿𝐴 stated that those who had been paired together too often would be spending time with others of his choosing. A slight smile played on 𝐻𝐿𝐴's lips as he mentioned All Might. Dash's heart sank as he realized what that meant for Izuku's pairing. Panic surged within him. He needed to find a way to stop this before it began. But what could he do? Time was running out since 𝐻𝐿𝐴 mentioned the camp would start next week. He felt the rising panic, which 𝐻𝐿𝐴 could easily read from a distance, making Ethan feel even more exposed. Clearing his throat, 𝐻𝐿𝐴 wrapped up his announcement. He urged everyone to prepare for the event, emphasizing that attendance was mandatory. With that, he dismissed them. Ethan dashed out the door before anyone else could notice, while Izuku rushed up to Katsuki with a wide smile. Katsuki met him with his usual smirk, and the two broke into excited chatter about how great the camp would be, reminiscent of their days at UA. All Might observed the tired underground hero with a smile, shaking his head in amusement. He knew 𝐻𝐿𝐴 had planned this on purpose. Their long history made it impossible for 𝐻𝐿𝐴 to fool him. 𝐻𝐿𝐴's dark eyes met All Might's smiling blue ones as he stood with his hands in the pockets of his navy suit. He then looked back out at the sea of his former students, noticing the blonde and green-haired boy leaning against the wall, with Izuku animatedly talking while Katsuki grinned and nodded, likely boasting about his explosive abilities. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 feigned innocence, claiming he was merely on pest patrol, ensuring that any troublemakers were dealt with properly. He knew All Might wanted to see the problem children reunited just as much as he did. Katsuki sat atop the hero agency rooftop, his powerful legs dangling over the edge. His hero mask rested on his forehead, allowing him a moment of respite as he drank from his water bottle, his gaze drifting over the city below. His thoughts, however, were focused on a certain green-haired hero he hadn't spoken to since the announcement of training camp 2 days prior. A slight smile formed on his lips as he recalled the overly enthusiastic hero, who had always been excited about training camp, just as he had been back in their UA days. Izuku had always loved those experiences, and in turn, Katsuki had grown fond of them too. Some of his best memories were of the fun they shared during those trips. But things had changed. There were